Hello, dreamers, and welcome to Haunted Sleep. This is the place where eerie tales and calming whispers meet, helping you drift into peaceful sleep with a touch of mystery. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Leave a comment below and let me know. And if you're enjoying these nightly journeys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a night of chilling calm. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. My older sister Sam rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Madison, Wisconsin, on South Park Street during her junior year at UW-Madison. The apartment had a beautiful corner window in the living room, but a large pine tree blocked the view of the busy street. Sam would often call me, in tears, telling me about the ghostly figures she'd seen. I'd brush it off and roll my eyes, thinking she was just imagining things. After months of Sam begging me to visit, I finally went. When she opened the door, I immediately felt uneasy. My eyes were drawn to the hallway, and all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Sam gave me a tour of the apartment, showing me how much space she had and even trying to convince me to move in with her. When she opened the walk-in closet in her bedroom, I felt goosebumps on my arms. I told her to close it immediately because I had the strong feeling someone had hung themselves in there. That summer, my parents dropped off my 2 little sisters to stay with Sam. Sam, being the irresponsible one, decided to leave them alone in the apartment, while she went out with friends. My sisters, Pom and Him, were excited to be left alone. Around midnight, Him fell asleep on the futon, and Pom stayed up watching TV. When Pom's eyes grew heavy, she laid next to him. A few minutes later, Pom was woken by the sound of high heels clacking on the concrete, followed by voices of women laughing and the sound of keys sliding into the front door. Pom assumed Sam was back and waited in the dark, but the door never opened. Pom rushed to the window to check for Sam's car but saw something else. A dark figure was sitting by the pine tree, and Pom saw the outline of a little girl with curly hair and a puffy dress. Terrified, Pom screamed, waking him, and they held each other and cried. Just 5 minutes later, they heard the same high heels and voices again. The front door opened, and Sam and her friends walked in. After that night, the girls refused to stay at the apartment again. When I moved in with Sam, we shared the room, and I slept on the top bunk. Sam had set up her computer in the corner, so when you sat at it, your back was to the closet door and the bedroom door. Every time I used the computer, I would feel like someone was watching me from the doorway. My friends thought I was going crazy, especially since I was living with Sam, who they thought was a bit of a lunatic. One day, they came over to cheer me up. We were all sitting on the bottom bunk, chatting and listening to music. One of my friends cranked up the volume and started dancing, and the rest of us joined in. But then, the music started to fade as if someone had turned the volume down. This happened a few more times, and we got freaked out. We ran into the living room, and as the last one of us ran out, the doors slammed behind us. My friend screamed, saying she felt something pushing her out, and the door slammed on its own. Over time, Sam and I got used to living with the others, as we called them. Our friends still came over to support us, but Sam saw the figures most often. Sometimes when the figures saw her, they seemed scared, too. It got to the point where I'd hear Sam talking or even screaming at the figures, telling them to go away. We thought we were losing our minds, until my entire family moved in temporarily while waiting for their new house to be ready. One night, my older brother was working late on his computer in the living room. I was watching TV, and after a while, I went to bed. A few minutes later, he came into my room and asked if I had turned off the TV. I told him I had, but when we checked, the TV was on, showing only static. He turned it off and went back to his work. After that, the TV would turn on by itself every night, always to static. He checked the circuits and even kept the remote nearby, but it still turned on by itself. It didn't stop there. Our computer started turning on by itself too. Even when I'd shut it down and unplug it, the computer would run without being plugged in. It felt like someone, or something, was messing with us just for fun. One day, my little niece, who was only 3 years old, was running around the apartment, laughing and playing by herself. When I asked her who she was playing with, she said it was her new friend. She was too young to have an imaginary friend. One morning, I found her hiding under the covers in the second bedroom. She was saying, "I'm going to tell my mom if my friend doesn't behave." When I pulled back the covers, I saw that she had scratches on her face, as if tiny fingernails had dug into her cheeks. The final strange event occurred when my mom slept on Sam's bottom bunk while Sam was on her computer. Mom woke up and saw a little blonde girl standing at the bedroom doorway. She thought it was Sam, but when she looked closer, she realized it was a girl in a puffy Victorian dress, with black buckled shoes and a big bow in her hair. The girl reminded her of Alice from Alice in Wonderland, but with curly hair. The little girl turned around and disappeared down the hallway. After that, everything started to make sense, why we always felt uneasy when using the computer or why the TV and computer turned on by themselves. We now knew who had been playing with my niece. We're still not sure who the girl was or why she haunted that apartment, but whenever I drive past that complex, I still get goosebumps. My name is Anna, and this happened when I was about 9 years old. I had moved from Japan to Los Angeles when I was 7, with my 2 older brothers, my sister, my little brother June, and our mom. My parents weren't divorced. My dad stayed in Japan for work and joined us a year later. One day, my mom, Matthew, and Catalin, the 2 oldest siblings, went grocery shopping, leaving June, Ron, and me at home. June and I were playing when I suddenly felt someone pull my hair. I thought it was June, so I hit him back, but I got in trouble with Ron. I tried to explain what happened, but Ron didn't listen, so I just shrugged it off. The next day, I was looking for paper to draw on in my parents' room when I saw a little girl standing in the doorway. She was about my age, with brown hair and pigtails and wearing a knee-length white dress. We just stared at each other, then she turned and walked away without saying anything. I thought it was strange, but we had company that day, so I figured she was their daughter. After they left, I asked my mom about the girl, but she had no idea who I was talking about. I argued with her a bit, but she got annoyed, and I dropped it. 2 days later, I was watching TV in the living room when Catalin came to me, saying, "Your friend is waiting at the door." I was confused and said, "What friend? I don't know anyone here." But she pulled me to the door, where no one was. She seemed puzzled but then said, "She was here earlier." I asked Catalin what the girl looked like, and her description matched the girl I had seen in my parents' room. My curiosity grew, but at that age, I didn't feel scared. I didn't even think the word ghost applied. I decided that the next time the girl showed up, I'd talk to her and ask why she was following me. 3 weeks went by, and I hadn't seen her again, until one day. I went to my brothers, June and Ron, who were in Matthew's room looking for a video game. I just hung out with them while they searched. Then I saw the girl. She was sitting on my brother's bed. June and Ron didn't see her because they were busy with the closet. I shouted, "Hey! Why do you keep following me? What do you want?" My brothers asked who I was talking to, but I ignored them. The girl was leaving, so I followed her to my room and tried to talk to her. To my surprise, she spoke back. She told me her name was Sally. She said she was dead and that this used to be her house. Sally explained that her parents had been murdered by her older sister because their parents favored Sally more than her sister. She said she missed her sister, even though jealousy had led to her death. Sally also mentioned that her sister was still alive. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, so I said, "I don't believe you. This is a joke, right? You're really creeping me out." Sally then said, "I'm not joking. I'm a ghost. I'll prove it." And she walked straight through my wall. When she came back, I was scared. I had just talked to a ghost. I asked her, "Aren't ghosts supposed to be mean? Why are you being nice to me?" She told me she was kind and just wanted a friend. Sally explained that we were the third family to live in the house, and that whenever she tried to make friends with the other kids, they'd get scared, and their families would move out. Now I'm 13, and I'm no longer afraid of Sally. I know she means no harm. She's my friend, and we still talk, even though I'm the only one who knows about her. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Most of the paranormal experiences I've had have happened in my home, but this one occurred miles away, and I was the only witness. I live in Mendenhall Valley, Juneau, and my high school is downtown, so getting there and back takes a while. Sometimes, out of boredom, my family and I will take random drives around downtown. On this particular day, it was my parents' anniversary, and my dad wanted to show my mom a trail he had noticed while at work. We all piled into the car, me, my brother, and our parents, and drove downtown. The trail leads up the side of a mountain, and the full hike takes about a day. We decided to take a shorter walk to the old entrance of one of the many mines in the area. These mines have been closed for decades, so they're dark, dusty, and kind of creepy. When we reached the mine entrance, there was a small exhibit showing some of the old tools used by the miners. My parents and brother checked out the display, while I wandered off aimlessly, as I tend to do. I started kicking a rock around, and it ended up rolling into the mine. I followed it, and that's when I realized where I was. There was a rusted gate with a "Closed, do not enter" sign on it. About 10 feet past the gate, a huge pile of rocks sealed off the rest of the shaft. I figured this mine had caved in at some point. It was mid-afternoon, and I started to feel a chill. The underground wind shifted, and instead of blowing away from me, it started to pull me toward the gate. As I looked inside, I saw 4 or 5 men standing in the dark. They were dressed in dirty white shirts, jeans with suspenders, and each of them had a pick over their shoulder. They stopped walking when they noticed me, and when they looked at me, I saw they had no eyes, just dark, empty holes. I couldn't move. A wave of fear and despair hit me all at once. The men stretched out their free hands and pointed their fingers at me, as if accusing me of something. I was paralyzed by the intensity of it. The next thing I knew, my mom was shaking me, asking, Tiffany, what's wrong? What happened?" I realized I was standing outside the mine entrance, and the horrible feeling had lifted. I told her, "I'm fine," though I was still shaken up. Apparently, while I had been staring into the mine, my parents and brother had started hiking back down the trail to the car. My mom noticed I wasn't with them and came back to look for me. When she found me, she said I was deathly pale and staring at something that wasn't there, repeating over and over, I didn't do it." She pulled me away from the mine, and after that, I felt fine. I didn't remember anything past seeing the men pointing at me, so I told her what I had seen. But she didn't see the men and thought maybe I had just had an episode or something. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later, when I reflected on what happened, I realized that those men had likely died when the mine collapsed. I don't know why they pointed at me or accused me, but I haven't gone back to that part of the trail since. The lower part of the trail is used for gym class, but whenever I walk there, the spot behind my right ear starts to hurt. The pain gets worse the farther I go, until it feels almost unbearable. There's a house in my hometown where I used to live, and where one of my best friends lived later. Both of us have seen strange things in that house, some at the same time, and some at different times. The first strange experience I had was one morning while I was getting ready for school. I was heading downstairs with my sheet because it was always cold. As I walked, I felt like something was behind me. I turned around and saw a dog, but it was see-through and had no head. It was unsettling, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The second time was when I went down to the basement one night, where we had our pool table. As I turned on the basement light and started walking down the stairs, I felt something grab my leg from behind the stairs. I freaked out, ran down the rest of the stairs, and the light went out. I bolted out the side door, and after that, we moved the pool table upstairs. There was also this wooden box in my parents' room, like a storage box, but I could never get it open. Now, onto what my best friend experienced. After my family moved out, my friend moved in about 5 or 6 years later. I had completely forgotten about the strange things I'd seen until he started telling me his own experiences. He said that some nights, he'd hear and see a red ball bouncing up and down the stairs. He also saw a little girl, crying, apparently because her doll's head had fallen off. But then, he said a man would show up, wielding an axe. He'd grab the girl and drag her out of the room, throwing her down the stairs. One night, he gathered the courage to follow them. They made their way to the basement, where the ghosts disappeared. The basement seemed to change before his eyes. The floor was covered with bones, and in the corner, there was a light. The basement also had a small tunnel that wrapped around half of the house. He crawled through it, and found an axe resting against the wall, but when he went to grab it, it vanished. One summer, I spent the night there again. It was a typical evening. We were watching ECW, a wrestling show. Suddenly, the sky outside grew unnervingly dark, like it was freakishly dark for 4 p.m. Then, lightning started flashing. My friend said that this had happened before, and when the lightning flashed 13 times, that's when the ghostly figures appeared. I laughed it off, thinking he was just messing with me. But then, the second lightning strike happened. I looked out the window and saw a figure across the street in an abandoned trailer. It looked like someone was staring right at me, but the trailers were empty. Then I woke up with a wet towel on my head and toilet paper on my nose. My friend said I had started shaking, my nose had begun to bleed, and I passed out. I sat up and asked how many lightning strikes we'd had. He said 10, and asked me what I saw. I tried to explain it was like a man-shaped figure with glowing red eyes. Then, another flash of lightning struck, followed by another. There was only one more flash left, and my friend said we'd see if his story held true. When the final strike came, there was no thunder. Then, the TV turned off, and a cold chill filled the room. My eyes adjusted, and I saw a figure, a little girl. I quickly closed my eyes and pulled the covers over my head, but then I felt something tugging at them. I whispered, "Stop it, Rick. I believe you now." I pulled the covers down, and the girl was right in front of my face. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. We later did some research and asked locals about the house. They confirmed it was haunted. One woman who used to live there added a chilling detail. She said one night she locked up the house and went upstairs to bed. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard the front door unlock and open, then shut and lock again. The only door that could be locked from the outside was on the side of the house, but she had locked it. She rushed downstairs, but no one was there. She went back to bed, only to hear dishes being moved around. When she went downstairs again, she found her knives and forks floating in the air. They stopped, then flew toward her. She barely managed to get behind a door for safety. She left that night and moved out the next day. Something truly horrible must have happened in that house, but whenever I try to find anything about it online or in local papers, nothing comes up. I can't help but think someone covered up the house's history just to sell it. I recently started a new relationship, and along with my daughters, my partner and I were looking for a place to live. We saw many houses, but one in particular caught my attention. I'll explain why later. This house was old. We kept searching for 2 more weeks, but the rent sign was still there. I felt a strong pull to it, so I called the owner, and within 2 weeks, we moved in. The house wasn't in great condition. There were termite issues, worn-down boards, and other repairs needed. But I liked it. My partner didn't. He always felt uncomfortable there. I found it peaceful, but his mood would change as soon as he stepped inside. He'd become angry, complaining about everything. It started to wear on me. We tried to talk about it outside the house, and he'd calm down, but once we were back inside, his mood shifted again. I'm a sensible person, and I tried to see things as they are. I didn't want to engage with whatever was in the house, but I had to admit that something strange was happening. Some people might say it's just the house, others believe it's something else. For me, it felt like something demonic, just lingering and causing discomfort. But I couldn't explain why. The first few weeks were fine, but then the strange things started. You know, in the movie The Grudge, where there are mysterious knocks on the wall? We experienced something similar. It was soft tapping on the wall next to my partner's side of the bed. I told myself it was just mice. But the taps always stopped when we got close to the wall. One night I'd had enough. I told whatever it was to go away. And it did, but it moved to my side of the bed. I told it to go back, and it did. That was when I started to realize something weird was happening, and I had to be careful. During the day, I started feeling like someone was watching me. I even saw a transparent little girl's figure a few times. I didn't feel scared though, she didn't seem harmful. I'd just notice her and go on with my day. She wasn't around often and never made a sound. I have a daughter with diabetes. One night, while sleeping, I felt this entity move my arm. I woke up and saw the girl again. She pointed toward my daughter's room, and I felt the need to check on her. When I went to her room, she wasn't feeling well, so I had to take her to the hospital. This happened 3 times, and each time, my daughter needed emergency care. The little girl had warned me. One night, everyone was asleep. I opened my eyes and saw the girl standing by my partner's side of the bed, staring at him. I don't know why. I woke him up so he could see her, but he couldn't. He said only I could see her. I didn't try to communicate with the girl. I just went back to sleep. Another time, we returned home, and I turned on the living room lights. My little daughter passed the office room, and the lamp turned on by itself. She got scared, but I told her it was probably just the heat that triggered the touch lamp. She didn't say anything more about it. But then, one day, she saw the little girl. She was walking by the office, looked again, and the girl was gone. My partner also saw her. He thought it was our daughter at first, but it wasn't possible. My 14-year-old was in the living room with my youngest child, playing. Later, we were in the bedroom, and he saw the curtain in the walk-in closet move. He looked inside and saw a head poking out. I saw it too, but I didn't say anything. I thought he wouldn't see her. But to my surprise, he did. He asked, "How did Talia get in here?" She was in the living room, and I closed the door. I told him it was the little girl, and he was freaked out. We moved into our 80-plus-year-old house a little over 5 years ago. Our youngest son was only 2 at the time. He refused to go into the bathroom alone, saying he saw black eyes in there. At first, we thought it was just his imagination or a way to avoid potty training. But soon, things started disappearing. Items like hairbrushes, keys, and coffee cups would be placed somewhere, only to show up in a different spot later. We also began feeling like we were being watched. I'd feel taps on my shoulder while working on the computer. My kids would come over, thinking I'd called them, but I hadn't. One day, my son and I were in the kitchen, and a box of cereal flew off the top of the refrigerator. It hit the window over the sink and fell into the sink. We just stared at each other, not knowing what to say. I started seeing a large, dark figure moving from the bathroom, down the hall, and through the wall, only to return and repeat the process. My husband didn't believe in spirits, but even he saw it. Soon, the kids started telling us about seeing a large black thing walking around the house. We hadn't told them what we had seen. One night, a friend was over, and we were watching a ghost cam online. The lights in the computer room were off, and all the kids were gathered around us. Suddenly, the lights turned on. I assumed one of the kids had turned them on, so I asked them to turn them off again. The lights went off. My friend joked that she liked the lights on, and instantly, they turned back on. One of the kids asked, "Who did that?" We turned around, and the kids were right there with us, nowhere near the light switch. I said, "I want the lights OFF." And they turned off again. One night, I was in bed watching TV. My husband was at work, and our 2 youngest sons were asleep on the sofas. Our daughter was at a sleepover, and our two older sons were watching TV in the living room. My son came in and asked if I had heard anything. I laughed and told him he was probably just spooked from watching something scary. He came back in a few minutes later, asking me to join him in the living room. Annoyed, I went in and started a sewing project to pass the time. The boys looked scared and kept asking, "Mom, did you hear that?" I hadn't heard anything, so I kept sewing, but they stopped me again. Finally, a loud thud came from upstairs. The boys kept asking if I had heard that. I blamed it on the cats, but my son pointed to the two cats sleeping on the floor. Then the thudding happened again, over and over, for about an hour. We were too scared to go upstairs to check it out. Eventually, the noise stopped. The boys fell asleep, but I stayed awake until my husband came home at 6 a.m. I hesitated to tell him what happened since he didn't believe in spirits, even though he'd seen the dark figure. When I told him, he laughed and went upstairs to check. I followed him. He stopped before the last step. Looking over his shoulder, I saw that our oldest son's room had been completely destroyed. The box springs were off the beds, mattresses were leaning against the walls, and the dresser was in the middle of the room with the TV on top. Without saying a word, we cleaned the room. I talked to a friend who suggested burning white sage to cleanse the house. I also researched hauntings online. I took my digital camera upstairs in the dark, snapping pictures wherever I felt a cold or strange energy. When I uploaded the photos, I was shocked. In one picture there were hundreds of orbs in the hallway, almost like a galaxy. In another, I saw a red blob at the bottom of the stairs. The photo of the fireplace showed a woman in white, almost glowing. I didn't tell anyone what I thought it was, but when I showed the photo to friends and family, everyone said it looked like a woman. We burned the white sage throughout the house, inside and outside. Things calmed down for a while. Then a neighbor told me that devil worshippers had rented our house before we moved in. She said strange sounds came from the house, and when they were evicted, she and her husband found demonic graffiti on the walls. That explained a lot, and I was glad we'd cleansed the house. But within a few months, the strange events started again. One night, my daughter yelled for us. We ran upstairs to find her TV flipping channels on its own. I thought maybe she was sitting on the remote, but it was on her nightstand. I took the batteries out, but the TV kept changing channels. The next day, the older boys yelled for us. We found their TV showing only French channels, completely random, as we don't live in a French-speaking area. The bathtub started running water by itself, and the toilet would flush with no one near it. Then, my self-cleaning oven started making a buzzing sound while we were watching TV. We went into the kitchen to find the oven's control panel flashing from numbers to letters to strange symbols. We watched it for almost 5 minutes in silence. The kids were terrified. I finally yelled, "Knock it the F***K off!" The oven door immediately fell off, and when I inspected it, the hinges looked as if they had been cut. I tried talking to the spirits. I didn't know why, but I felt like one of them might be an elderly woman who had grown up in the house. I didn't know who the dark one was. I told them they could stay if they wanted, but they needed to stop scaring our family. I even told them they would be happier if they went to the other side. After that, I started feeling depressed and sad, for no real reason. My life was great, but I felt hopeless. I started to realize that perhaps the sadness was coming from the spirits. Over time, the dark figure appeared more often, especially in the foyer, living room, kitchen, hallway, and even my daughter's bedroom. She didn't believe in spirits, but one night she saw the dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. Visitors would say they felt uneasy or like they were being watched, even though we never told them about our experiences. My daughter's friends spent the week with us and reported feeling a cold spot in the living room. She didn't know about the haunting, but she mentioned feeling watched while in the bathroom. For the last 4 months, I'd been waking up with deep, burning scratches on my arms, legs, back, and face. They burn, and sometimes I wake up with scars. The scratches are usually in groups of 3, with the middle one being the deepest. I don't have long nails, and nothing in my bedding could cause them. Our dog sleeps in my son's room now, but sometimes she suddenly growls at nothing. I'm not sure if this is happening because of the sage or if the spirits are angry with me, but I'm scared. My mom wants us to move, but I'm not sure if the spirits would follow us. For now, we're just trying to live with it. We moved into the house in April 2005, and by August, we were already planning to leave. For a while, I felt peaceful there. I loved it. But things started to change. I'd hear children crying, 2 children, it seemed, but it wasn't often. The cries always led me to the corner of the wall by my husband's side of the bed, the same place where I'd hear tapping sounds. It was eerie, and I felt a chill whenever I went back to that spot. Other parts of the house were peaceful, but the bedroom always felt cold. I felt something had happened in this house, or maybe on the land before it was built, and it left behind a bad energy. I was uncomfortable, desperate even, wanting to help the children I could hear crying, but I didn't know what I was dealing with. My husband didn't hear the cries at first, but eventually he did. One night, when my daughter was in the hospital for the 3rd time, I had been warned about it by the child ghost, who had pointed to her room. My husband returned to the house alone. He just parked the car when he heard the cries. He thought they were coming from the neighbors, but they sounded like they were inside the house. He followed the sound, and it led him to the same spot, the corner of the bedroom wall. He told me the next day, and he was visibly shaken. He couldn't sleep that night, and had a painful pressure in his head. My daughter stayed in the hospital for nearly a week, and during that time, strange things kept happening. One day, a man approached my husband at the hospital and asked if the abandoned house next door was for sale. The owners of the house had told us it was never going to be sold. The man said he was a medium, and the house had drawn him in. He even gave my husband a card. The next evening, the same man showed up again while my husband was reading the newspaper on the balcony. He warned that people were leaving the island due to political changes and predicted a revolution. It was a strange warning, especially since we had been talking about the same concerns. It made me uneasy. I continued to see the little girl, who just stared at me as I went about my day. She never bothered me, but there were moments when I felt scared. One day, while cleaning the kitchen after breakfast, I left a pot and a fork on the stove to put away later. When I stepped out, I heard the fork tap against the pot. When I went back in, everything was exactly as I left it. But I knew what I heard. I hit the pot with the fork to test the sound. It was the same. I said, "So you like cream oatmeal?" Because I always made oatmeal in that pot. I felt like I knew what she wanted. I told my husband about it, and he was shocked. At that same moment, he told me he saw a dark shadow walking into our room while he was having breakfast. I went to check, but I didn't see anything. The room felt unnaturally cold, though. When I asked him to describe the shadow, he said it was thin, dark, and transparent, not very tall, just passing through. He didn't feel like it was looking at him. Eventually, we decided to move. Our relationship had become strained, and things were getting worse. I told my husband I was planning to move into an apartment with my eldest daughter. I'd already spoken to the owner and arranged for the movers. Then one day, he came home and told me about a house for rent near his son's place. He didn't want to lose me. I was relieved, and we decided to stay together. On moving day, my eldest daughter was helping me pack, and she called my name. When I went to see her, her eyes were wide with fear. She said, "I saw you go into the other room, but when I called, you answered from somewhere else." She had seen a dark figure, not me. She was so scared, she wouldn't go back into the house. We finished moving and then went back to clean up the old house. As soon as I opened the door, I felt an unpleasant energy. I told the kids to stay outside, and I went in alone to clean. As I worked, I could still hear the tapping sounds. I saw the little girl a few times, staring at me, and I also saw the lady, who looked angry but didn't speak. By the time the house was cleaned and empty, I felt a strange sense of peace, just like when we first moved in. But then I realized, Maybe that's how they get people to move in, only to scare them later. When we moved to the new place, everything felt calm and peaceful. And that was the end of my time in that house. Do I have a ghost at work? It started when my aunt and I launched our cleaning business for offices and such. We took on some subcontract work, which, unfortunately, I'm still stuck with. Debbie, my aunt's partner in the business, stopped working with me due to family commitments. The place we cleaned was a 3-level building, which was a big job for just the two of us. It took about 4.5 hours a night, 5 nights a week. At first, when Debbie was still working with me, not much happened. The only odd thing was her frequently asking me what I wanted, as if I had called her. Of course, I hadn't. I kept telling her I hadn't called her, and we would brush it off. This went on for a few months. I didn't really pay attention to the strange occurrences and thought nothing of them. After Debbie left, I hired another person to help with the workload. One night, we were working on the 2nd level, and suddenly, this awful stench came from the kitchen area. It quickly spread throughout the whole floor. We tried to ignore the smell and moved on to the main office we cleaned. As we were emptying the waste paper bins, we heard the rattling of the double glass doors. I assumed someone was just going into the office across the hall. But it happened again a few minutes later. When we went to check, there was no one there. We were both freaked out by this, and it kept happening. We quickly made our way downstairs to the 1st level, sticking together the whole time. We cleaned the bathrooms and kitchens together, not wanting to separate. I left the keys, about 10 of them, on the table just inside the main glass doors. When we returned to grab the keys, they were gone. We searched everywhere but couldn't find them. We were so scared at this point that we called security to escort us to our cars. The next day, the keys were found in the men's bathroom, the first place we had looked. It was unsettling, to say the least. Over time, more strange things happened, chemicals going missing and then reappearing in places we didn't remember putting them, and phones randomly playing the radio, only to stop when we walked away. Then, last night, things escalated. One of my staff members, Jody, started working before I arrived. About 30 minutes before I got there, she called me, terrified, saying a woman's voice had said, "Hi," but there was no one else in the building. She was scared to death, so I told her to stay downstairs until I got there with my uncle, who sometimes helped out. When we all went up together, nothing else happened at first. But a few hours later, things took a turn. I went downstairs with Jody to help her with some rubbish. I left her in the lower level and went up to check on Carrie, set the alarms, and finish up. When I stepped off the lift, the vacuum cleaner was sitting there, but no Carrie. I heard laughter behind me, to my left. When I turned around, no one was there. A moment later, Carrie came out of the glass doors to my right. I asked him what he was laughing about, but he claimed he hadn't laughed. We went back down to the cleaning room to pack everything away, but we couldn't find the mop. So we went back up to the 1st level to search for it. We found it, and as we headed back down, I suddenly realized something. There were 4 people in the lift, not 3. I can't describe the feeling. It was the most terrified I've ever been. It was just a glimpse, but it was there. I didn't say anything until we reached the ground floor, thinking we were finally safe in the cleaning room. We were sitting at the table when Jody started freaking out about the light. We looked up, and the tube light, hanging from chains, was swinging. Carrie steadied it, and we tested the door to see if it could be the cause. But nothing we did, except manually pushing the light, made it move. I was staying at my grandparents' house, where my aunt and her 2 kids also lived. My aunt was scheduled for surgery the next day, so she needed to take a large amount of laxatives to empty her bowels. My cousin and I stayed to help with her kids since my grandparents were away. The house had 3 rooms, all close to each other. My cousin Stephen was to sleep in his own room, which was further away from where I was sleeping in my cousin Kate's room. Kate was going to sleep in my grandparents' room with my other cousin, Rachel, and my aunt was going to sleep on the couch to avoid waking anyone up every time she needed to go to the bathroom. Everyone was getting ready for bed, and I was lying on Kate's bed, waiting for my aunt to turn off the light. As I lay there with my eyes closed, I started to feel something pawing at my legs. The family had several dogs and cats, so I thought it was one of them. But when I looked up, there was nothing there. I still felt the sensation, though. My aunt came in and handed me their new kitten to sleep with and turned off the light. I was a little freaked out, but I tried to calm myself by petting the cat, which was staring up at the wall behind me. Suddenly, the cat freaked out and bolted out of the room. I felt strangely cold, even though it was summer and had been hot just moments before. Kate's bed was next to a window, so I could hear everything outside. I was still trying to sleep when I heard two men talking outside. At first, I thought it was someone walking past the fence, but the language they were using seemed too formal for anyone from this town. I looked outside but saw no one, even though I could still hear their conversation. I tried to ignore it and laid back down, but then my cousin Kate startled me. I could just make out her outline in the dark hallway, and I yelled at her, chasing her back to her room and shutting the door behind me. I was now really freaked out. I couldn't sleep, and the cold feeling returned. I was about to get up to find another blanket when I looked towards the doorway, where the light switch was. In the doorway, I could make out the outline of a little girl. I froze. It couldn't have been Kate. This figure had longer hair and was shorter than her. The doors to my grandparents' rooms always squeaked loudly when opened, but I hadn't heard anything, so it couldn't have been Kate coming back. As I stared at the figure, I noticed it was holding something gleaming in its hand, what looked like a long knife blade. Slowly, the figure moved closer to me. I screamed as loudly as I could for my aunt, and shut my eyes. My aunt rushed in, turned on the light, and asked me what was wrong. I ignored her, jumped out of bed, and ran to where Kate was sleeping. But Kate was fast asleep, so it definitely wasn't her. Completely shaken, I refused to sleep in that room. I went to the kitchen at the other end of the house with my aunt, while she had a smoke. She needed to use the bathroom again, so I was left standing there alone. Then I noticed her dog sitting at my feet, so I bent down to pet it. As I did, I felt a hand gently rub my back, like someone was reassuring me that everything was okay. When I stood up, there was no one there. I moved into a new house 9 months ago to stay with a family friend while I was attending college. The house seemed pretty normal at first, aside from a few bumps in the night, but things started getting strange about a month ago. It all began one night when I was sleeping. My roommate, who doesn't believe in ghosts, woke me up and asked if I had turned the television on. I hadn't used the TV in days, and I don't watch much TV anyway. It seemed like a random occurrence, and I figured it couldn't have been on a timer because it would have turned on and off at the same time each day. So, we shrugged it off and went back to sleep. A few days later, I was cleaning the house when I heard a woman singing. There was no radio on, and I was the only one in the house. The singing seemed to be coming from the basement. I went over to the basement door and stood there, listening. After a few moments, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs from the basement. I opened the basement door. No one was there. A little while later, while I was eating lunch, the television turned on and then off by itself. I didn't think much of it, figuring it was just some weird glitch. Then, a woman's voice started talking from the back bedroom. I went to check, thinking maybe the TV had turned on again, but it was off, and there was no one in the room. I called my mom to talk about it so I wouldn't feel creeped out, but after that, things calmed down for a few days. A week and a half later, I was cleaning the bedrooms while waiting for my friend to call. She had told me she would call around noon, but when it was around 1 p.m., I decided to call her instead. She said she had tried calling me, but when someone picked up, she heard a TV in the background, and the phone was hung up. I thought maybe she had dialed the wrong number, so she said she would redial. Just then, my phone rang. I answered it while walking by the basement door, and I heard voices coming from downstairs. Curious, I went down and found that the TV in the basement was on. The phone in the basement had also been used, but I was the only one in the house. The TV hadn't been used in at least a couple of weeks, and the remote was sitting untouched on a shelf. It's become clear to me that there's a woman in my basement. She sometimes sings, and I hear her walking around. I like her though, she's friendly. Ghosts don't always have to be scary. She has a beautiful singing voice. Sometimes I go downstairs and talk to her, but nothing happens while I'm down there. As soon as I leave and go back upstairs though, she starts making noise again. I've lived in the same house for about 15 years now, and ever since I was young, my sister and I have experienced some strange things. I'll share a few of my encounters. The first time I noticed something was off in the house, I was around 9 or 10. I had a friend over for a sleepover, and we were in the basement. I went upstairs for some reason I can't remember, and on my way back down, I tripped and fell. It was only about 6 stairs, but I distinctly felt something push me. It was as if hands were on my back, giving me a forceful shove. When I landed at the bottom, I looked back up, expecting to see my sister or someone else, but there was no one. Instead, I saw a figure, sort of blurry and undefined. The background around the figure seemed distorted, as if it wasn't in focus. My friend came to check on me, but when I looked back at the figure, it was gone. A few weeks after the fall, something else happened. I was home alone and went to the garage to grab a soda. While I was in there, I heard strange noises coming from the attic. It sounded like footsteps moving around up there. Curious, I called out, "Hello?" The noise stopped for a moment, but then it came back, much louder, almost like a burst of energy or rage. The noise raced towards the attic door. Terrified, I ran back into the house and out the front door. I didn't go back inside until someone else was home with me. It wasn't until recently that the spirit in the house adopted a more recognizable form. Or maybe it was just the first time I noticed it clearly. He's massive, about 6 feet 6 inches or 6 feet 7 inches, easily 250 to 300 pounds. His body and face are a flat, paper white color, and he has a full head of jet black hair. The first time I saw him like this was last summer when I came home from a late night out. As I struggled with my keys to get inside, I saw a huge, white figure standing right in front of the door, visible through the sidelight windows. I screamed and yelled at it to leave me alone. It just slid away, disappearing the way it had come. I rushed inside and locked my bedroom door, like that would keep me safe. He loves to mess with people, especially me. He takes things and moves them around. He's especially fond of electronics. One night, I had some friends over, and we were hanging out in the basement. We kept hearing loud thuds coming from upstairs. At first, I thought it was just one of the cats, but all the cats were outside. I asked my friend Cody to come check it out with me, and he agreed. We went upstairs, but there was nothing unusual. As we moved up to the second floor, we heard an alarm clock going off in my parents' room. It was around 9 p.m., and there was no reason for it to be on. What made it stranger was that it was my mom's clock, and it was making the alarm beeps. My mom's clock is set to the radio, and the alarm is never used. We both thought it was odd, but I turned it off and went back to the basement. Later, after my friends left, I was cleaning the first floor when I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He walked across the hallway and went into the garage. I also noticed a coat hanger on the closet door in the hallway swinging wildly. I immediately called my friends to come pick me up. There have been many more experiences in this house, and I'm still unsure whether the figure is evil or just likes to play pranks and scare me. Sometimes, when I asked him to leave me alone, it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Either way, I'm always on edge, waiting for the next encounter. I've never really been face to face with the ghosts in my house, but I've heard, seen, and felt their presence. The house is about a generation old, though I'm not exactly sure when it was built. Based on some information I got from a homemade Ouija board that my friends and I made, I think a girl was murdered here a few years after the house was built. She said her parents had the house constructed in the late 1800s. I haven't asked much about her, but I suspect the other ghost in the house might have killed her when they were both alive. I also think the man was hanged for her murder. Now that I've shared a bit about the history, here are some of my own experiences with the spirits in the house. The first time I noticed something strange was when I was walking past the loft staircase. I've always felt a presence near the stairs, but one day, I looked up, almost like you would glance at someone walking into a room. To my surprise, I saw a figure at the top of the stairs. It wasn't a full person, but more like a flowing outline that seemed to drift in the corner of my vision. It was like when you stare at a bright light too long, and the afterimage sticks with you. From that moment on, I knew my house was haunted. The second encounter happened almost a year later, though in the meantime, I'd been hearing strange noises, like footsteps coming from the basement. Nothing too alarming, just enough to keep me on edge. Around that time, my friend and I started using the Ouija board, despite warnings from another friend. One night, I was drifting off to sleep when I suddenly heard a sharp scream, as if someone was screaming right in my ear. I knew no one else had heard it because the house was completely still. At the time, I was too tired to think much of it, but when I woke up the next morning, I realized the scream had been a girl's voice. It really threw me off because I hadn't used the Ouija board in my house yet. The very next night, I was actually asleep, but I woke up for some reason. I don't know what time it was or why I woke up, but I found myself staring at someone in my room. It wasn't a figure or a haze, it was a person. A girl, I'm sure of it. She had light hair, maybe blonde, and it reached down to her waist. She was facing away from me, heading toward the door, like she was leaving. I didn't see any feet, but the bottom of her dress seemed to fade away as she moved. It only lasted a second, but it was long enough to notice the details. I wasn't scared at all. I was more fascinated than anything, though I was still a bit freaked out. It took me forever to fall back asleep after that, but eventually I did. Then, last week, while I was sick, I had another encounter. I was sitting in the bathroom with the door closed, and I was the only one home. My mom and stepdad were at work, and my sister was at school. After a while, I heard the fridge turn on, but it wasn't just that. I also heard a faint, high-pitched humming sound, almost like a muffled voice. It was singing a tune I didn't recognize, but it felt so familiar. The sound was coming from the basement, from my sister's room. I assumed it was the same girl I'd seen before. Later that day, I was sitting on the couch watching a movie when I heard a loud boom. I jumped up and looked around, thinking it was the cats knocking something over. But when I went to investigate, I heard another boom, this time from the basement. I was too scared to go check it out, so I just sat back down on the couch, hoping whatever it was wouldn't notice me. I knew it wasn't any of the cats because one was sleeping on my lap, another was on the other couch, and the last one was outside. So, that's all I've experienced in my house. Sometimes I wish it weren't happening at all, and other times, I wish there was more to it. But either way, it's here, and there's no point in denying it. When I was just a few months old, my family moved from Texas into a beautiful house in rural Louisiana. The house was surrounded by very few neighbors, which made it feel peaceful, yet isolated. Initially, we were renting, but eventually, the house went into bankruptcy, and the owners sold it to us. From the beginning, I sensed something unusual about the house. There were two ghosts, a mother and her daughter. My dad would often stay up late watching TV. Sometimes, he would hear me crying, so he would go check on me, even though it sounded like I was crying from the other side of the house. When he would reach my room, the crying would stop, and when he checked on me, there were no signs that I had been upset. This happened multiple times, but I was never the one crying. My dad even tried sneaking into my room, but the results were always the same. The crying always seemed to come from that part of the house, a place that had been added onto when the house was renovated years later. I was never scared, but it was definitely odd. When I was about 3 or 4, my dad started working overseas, so it was just my mom, me, my brother, and my sister. Sometimes, my sister's boyfriend would stay with us. I started having trouble sleeping in my room. I always felt like something was watching me, and I was afraid of the staircase, which I could clearly see from my door. My mom offered for my sister's boyfriend to sleep in my room, but he refused. He would always choose to sleep on the couch instead. I loved to draw as a child, and I would keep my drawings in the bottom of my closet. One night, my sister's boyfriend finally admitted to my mom that he didn't want to sleep in my room because one night, he woke up to the sound of papers moving. He got up to investigate, and saw papers floating in the air, being tossed to the side as though someone was going through them. It wasn't just the papers. My wind-up toys and a laughing phone would sometimes go off by themselves in the middle of the night. It was like the little girl ghost enjoyed playing with my toys. One night, I had a dream where the little girl was my best friend, and we would always play by the staircase and in my room. She refused to go anywhere else in the house. It felt so real that when I woke up, I wasn't even scared, just curious about her. As time went on, my brother and sister moved out, and it was just me, my mom, and the ghosts, the mother and the daughter. One day, my mom was going upstairs to clean my brother's room, and she saw a lady in a long brown dress standing on the staircase. The figure blocked her way up. Another night, I woke up to a strange creaking sound coming from my mom's room. I walked in, and the rocking chair was rocking by itself. I checked the window to see if the wind could have caused it, but the window was closed. There was even an indentation in the chair, like someone had been sitting there, maybe rocking a baby to sleep. When I was in first grade, we moved to Grand Isle but continued visiting the house on weekends. Every time we returned, the house felt colder than before, no matter what we did. We even had a fireplace installed, but it didn't help. The coldness was intense, and it was so bad that our plates cracked, and even my fish died. It was like the house had a strange, uncomfortable feeling. I missed the house, but when we visited, I couldn't stay there. I always preferred to go to a friend's house instead. One night I had a dream that my mom and I were outside, and suddenly, 3 men approached us, trying to kill us. They looked Vietnamese or Chinese. In the dream, our yard was a sugarcane field, and everything around it, except for the driveway and a tree, was sugarcane. The men buried a box next to the tree, which I recognized in real life. We moved away before I ever thought of digging there. One day, my mom shared that she had heard what sounded like a violent fight coming from the other side of the house. It sounded like 3 men were yelling and screaming, killing the mother and daughter, just like in my dream, but it wasn't about us. My mom described the men as sounding Vietnamese, and they were mostly shouting words with a K sound. I had never told her about the dream before. People who visited our house often heard whispering, saw shadows, and sometimes even heard my toys being played with. They all described the same things happening near my room or the staircase. They all knew the house was haunted, but how would they know about my room unless they had experienced it themselves? At first, my mom and I thought the ghosts were harmless, maybe just 2 innocent spirits. But everything changed when my mom decided to have the house blessed and look into its history. That's when our lives turned upside down. My dad forced us to sell the house, and things began going wrong. The more we thought about it, the more we realized that maybe these ghosts weren't as innocent as we had assumed. The house was plagued with bugs and snakes, no matter what we did. It was always cold, and no one wanted to stay there, everyone except for me and my mom. It was strange how we were the longest people to stay in the house, especially when there was a mother and daughter ghost. We finally moved, and things started to feel better. Though it was a beautiful house, we found a small, peaceful town in southern Louisiana, and my mom and I are much happier now. It turns out, money really can't buy happiness. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I was about 9 or 10 years old when my family moved into a new house in Arizona. My dad had to get out of my mother's house fast, and a friend of my sister's from dance was moving. Their house was in a location my dad liked, so he bought it right away. The house was small for a family of 5 kids, 1 adult, and 2 dogs, but my dad planned to add on to it. On the first night in the house, we didn't have our beds yet, so we slept on mattresses. I wanted to sleep in my own room, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I crashed in my sister's room with one of our dogs, Lola, a miniature dachshund. Lola had never really barked much, but that night she wouldn't stop. She kept barking at the door, even though my dad was out getting food and my brother was at hockey practice. The room grew ice cold, and it wasn't even winter, it was spring in Arizona. Lola started whining and jumping from mattress to mattress, as if something was bothering her. Once my dad came back, I finally settled in his office, since it was the only room that was somewhat finished. I spent a lot of time in my dad's office since it was the only place to be, and one day, while sitting on a chair I had broken my foot on, I'd broken my foot 3 times in that house, I started feeling a tickling sensation in my foot. At first I thought it was nothing, but then it turned into a sharp pain. I screamed for my dad, but he was on the computer and didn't hear me. This happened several times in that chair. A month later, it was Father's Day. We were all in my dad's room, opening gifts, having fun, when my older brother Michael stormed in, screaming, "This house is haunted! Mrs. Name omitted knew! You never told us?" My dad explained that Mrs. Name omitted had warned him about strange things happening in the house. She said one day, while folding laundry, she turned around and saw a woman standing there with a creepy smile. The woman screamed and threw clothes at her. Her cleaning ladies also quit after hearing strange things in the house. Curious, I went to my room to change. As I walked down the hall, I saw a dark figure in the front door. I screamed, and my dad came running. I told him I had seen her, but no one else had. Everyone shrugged it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. About 2 months later, I was getting ready for school, standing in front of the mirror in the hallway, when I saw her again. This time, I saw a full, glowing figure of a young woman. She had shoulder-length hair, a white shirt with a half-top tied in the middle, and a knee-length skirt. She was standing behind me, with her hand on my shoulder. I turned around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, I saw a shadow, but it didn't fade. It just disappeared. I ran to my dad, barely able to say anything but, she's, hand on shoulder, black shadow." One night, I was in my room when something strange happened. I felt a rush of wind, and my fan flew off my bunk bed, knocking over. I woke up like I had been lifted up and then thrown down. I tried to get up to fix the fan and close my window, but something invisible was holding me down. After a moment, it let me go, and I found my fan back in place, my windows shut and locked. I went back to sleep, but I heard a woman's voice singing me a lullaby. I covered my ears and yelled, "Go away! My mom doesn't live here!" A month later, my dad got me a pet mouse, and I noticed something strange. My mouse, Roxy, was awake during the day and asleep at night, unlike normal mice. At night, her metal wheel would spin by itself. One night, I decided to investigate. Roxy was asleep in her house, but the wheel kept turning on its own. It was terrifying to watch. We lived in the house for a year and a half. During that time, we tried to sell it. People who came into the house loved it at first, but then they would leave, almost depressed. I was the only one who noticed. We had 3 mice, one for each of my sisters and me. But then, Roxy killed my little sister Lauren's mouse, Muh. We thought it was strange because only male mice usually kill other mice, but ours were all female. After being away at my mom's house for 2 days, we came home to find Cookie, another mouse, dead. She had died of starvation, despite having 5 bowls of food. My dad couldn't explain it. When we went to check on Roxy, she had a huge cut on her rib area. We rushed her to the vet, but the injury couldn't be explained. That's when I screamed, "Roxy! Dad! Roxy!" My dad came running, and I blamed her for what had happened. We moved out 3 months later. My dad and I decided to investigate the history of the house. It turned out that every previous owner had some kind of connection with the last owner. We hired a psychic, who said the chair I had slept in was where the mother ghost would appear. She told us that my room had once belonged to the daughter, who died there. The mother was a Mormon who hated rodents. It all made sense, but after everything that happened, we decided it was time to leave. I was the only one who experienced most of these things, though my dad had small things happen. The strange part is, I think the ghost might be following me. I've been told that she thinks I'm her daughter, and that she wants me to stay. A few times, I've felt like I've been watched. After moving into a new house that was just built, I woke up one night to get a glass of water and saw her again. I started wondering if she was astral projecting from the old house. My dad believes I can see the dead. My aunt lives in a big old house in Cheshire with my 15-year-old cousin. Over the years, I've had some strange experiences there. I loved visiting, but something about the house was always off. I used to sleep over when I was about 9 or 10, and every time I had to get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, there was this weird feeling. It always felt like someone was watching me, especially around the loft staircase, the hidden small room in the loft, and the sitting room that was barely used. A few years later, my aunt's friend and her daughter moved in with them. One night, my aunt asked me to take a cup down for her. As I was almost at the bottom of the stairs, I happened to glance into the darkness ahead. The only light was coming from the TV in the sitting room, where my aunt's friend was watching a show. As I looked into the dark kitchen, I saw a horrible, gnarled hand in front of me. The hand looked evil, and I immediately looked away, rushed into the living room, and told my aunt's friend what I'd seen. She comforted me and had to walk me up the stairs because I refused to go out alone. She believed me because she was also open to the idea of the supernatural. I think this might have something to do with the fact that my aunt used a Ouija board with her friends years ago. I only heard this from my cousin, but she said that when my aunt asked if anyone was there, the cup violently flew off the table and smashed into pieces. After my aunt first moved into the house, my cousin was in London at the time, and she was alone for a few weeks. She later told me she heard someone walking up the stairs. A few days after that, my aunt had the house blessed and exorcised. Even after all that, I knew the spirit was still there. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I went back to visit, and the same eerie feeling returned. I felt like I was being watched, even though my aunt was upstairs and my cousin was out with her friends. I ignored it for a while, but one day while my cousin and aunt were talking in the kitchen, I noticed that the sitting room door, which was usually kept shut, was open. I closed it, but when I went back into the kitchen, it was open again. I closed it again, but the next time I checked, it was open, and this time, the light was on inside. Neither my aunt nor cousin had been out of the kitchen, and I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That same night, I went into the kitchen alone, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a white light outside in the kitchen window, even though it was pitch black outside. Later, when I took a shower, the feeling of being watched was even stronger. The next morning, I went to take my cousin's dog for a walk in the park. I was walking alone when I saw a hooded girl with a black dog running in front of her. At first, I thought it was my cousin, but then I remembered she was at home, fast asleep. I didn't think much of it, but when I looked away for just a fraction of a second and then back, the girl was gone. I looked around, but she wasn't anywhere to be seen. The dog had trotted past me, but when I looked again, the dog was at the other end of the path, which was impossible given how quickly it had passed me. I told my aunt about what happened, and she said I must have seen a ghost. Her friend, who I'm close with, also senses something in the house. When I came back home, strange things started happening there too. My mom's passport disappeared from where she left it, and a week later, it showed up in a bag in her wardrobe, one she'd already checked. A few days later, Her Oyster card went missing, even though she had searched her bag thoroughly. It reappeared in the same bag she had already searched. My mom thought it was a coincidence, but I knew it wasn't. Then, one night, my mom turned my light out when I had to go to bed. When I came back out of the bathroom, the covers on my bed were all messed up. My mom said she hadn't touched them. When I came back into the room later, the light was on, and the covers had been neatly folded back. This wasn't the first time I'd felt strange in the house. I often felt very cold when getting up in the middle of the night, and the sense of being watched was always there. It felt like something had followed me home. Before I visited my aunt's house again, nothing felt wrong in my home, but after that visit, everything changed. I've heard that spirits sometimes latch on to young people because they're more vulnerable. My parents don't believe me, and my mom is reluctant to do anything about it, even though I'm sure something is here. I won't use a Ouija board though. It's too risky, and I don't want to invite anything else in. It all began when we moved into a house that had been passed down through generations. The house had been left to my dad when my grandma passed away. It was an old mansion built by my ancestors and had been in our family since the 1600s. The house itself was large, 3 stories with a balcony on the 2nd and 3rd floors and a fountain in the front yard, although it didn't run. The history of the house was dark, and as I would later learn, it was haunted by the spirits of the original family. The family that once lived there, Henry, his wife Samantha, and their children David, 18, Abigail, 15, William, 10, Elizabeth, 8, Harold, 6, and Marie, 5, had a tragic and violent end. According to the history I uncovered, Henry became very sick and over time, was possessed by a demon. As his health deteriorated, he began to warn his children, telling David and Abigail that their deaths would be brutal. One night, while the children were sitting in the parlor, Henry shot and killed Samantha. The children tried to escape, but he killed them one by one. Afterward, he went into the backyard and took his own life. Fast forward to the present. After we moved in, strange things started happening almost immediately. It was a short time after we settled in when my parents and I were having dinner in the dining room. Suddenly, the table began to shake violently. After it stopped, I looked up and saw something run past the archway. I got up to investigate but found nothing. I was completely alone at that point, except for our cat, so I couldn't make sense of what I saw. The next night, I was alone in my room, preparing for bed. As I bent down to pick up something from my dresser, I suddenly felt a cold chill. When I looked up into the mirror, I saw a figure standing behind me. At first, I didn't know who it was, but I could feel my heart race with fear. I turned around, and the figure vanished. Terrified, I rushed down the hall to my parents' room, but they were already asleep. The following day, I heard heavy footsteps going up the stairs. I looked around but saw no one. A few minutes later, I heard the same footsteps again, this time right above my head, as if someone was walking around. My parents had already left for work, and I was alone in the house. I thought someone might have broken in, so I grabbed a stainless steel candle holder for protection. I crept upstairs, opened the door to my room, and all the noise immediately stopped. I stood there, frozen, wondering if the house could be haunted. Later that evening, my dad walked into the kitchen to get a drink. My mom and I were still sitting at the dinner table when we heard something break. We rushed into the kitchen to find a glass shattered on the floor. My dad was standing there, pale and shaken. He told us that he had seen a little girl sitting in a puddle of blood. She had cuts all over her body, and her eyes were completely white. We were all shaken by this, and none of us slept well that night. At around 12:09 a.m., I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard a little boy laughing. I sat up, but the laughter stopped. I lay back down and turned to face the wall, hoping to go back to sleep. But just a couple of minutes later, I heard the door creak open, and footsteps came closer. I rolled over to find David standing over me. He was wearing old-fashioned clothes, and his body was bloody and torn. His skin was gray, and he had cuts on his arms and a gash on his forehead. He was trying to speak, but his words were broken and barely made sense. Help you yes he's komi ing he'll kll. Then, just like that, he vanished. I was terrified. I grabbed a baseball bat, just in case, and ran down the hall to my parents' room. They weren't asleep yet, so I asked them if they had seen or heard anything strange. They both said no. That's when I decided to look up the history of the house on the computer. After learning about the tragic events that had occurred there, it made sense why the spirits of Henry and his family would still haunt the house. They were innocent but had been tortured and murdered, and their spirits were trapped there. Since then, we've gotten used to the hauntings. My mom once saw a dead boy in the bathtub, and my cousin heard a girl crying in my closet. Despite all the strange things that have happened, we've learned to live with it. But I can't help but wonder if the spirits are still trying to communicate with us, or if they simply don't know how to move on. Whatever it is, they are still there, and I can't ignore it anymore. The year was 1984, the year my mom graduated. A guy named Kevin, whom she graduated with, died just a few weeks after graduation. Kevin was in a car wreck around the age of 16 or 17. He still lived with his parents and siblings. One night, he was driving home, even though it was early and no one else was around. Suddenly, he lost control of his car and crashed, right beside the creek in his yard. He was seriously injured, bleeding badly, and with no one home, he tragically bled to death before his family returned. Fast forward to 7 years ago, when my family moved into the house next door to his old place. At the time, I had no idea about Kevin's death. It wasn't until later that I started piecing things together. I learned the history of what happened there when someone told me that Kevin's son had died in that house, and that's when everything clicked into place. One afternoon, my friend and I were playing in the woods behind our house when I noticed something strange in my neighbor's yard. There were two vehicles, a badly beaten-up car and a hearse. We were freaked out, and when I looked away for a moment, I looked back, and both vehicles had vanished. We went inside, and later, when my neighbor was outside, we asked him about the accident. He denied it, so we let it go. But right as the door closed behind him, the cars were back in the yard, and funeral music started playing. The music would get really loud and then fade out, like it was turning up and down on its own. Then, we saw flashes of light, like camera flashes, though no one was there to take pictures. We were terrified and went straight back to my house, staying inside for the rest of the day. The next day, we returned, and there were the hearse and the car again, the music still playing, and this time, there was what looked like blood around the car. The door of the hearse kept opening and closing on its own, and we could hear faint cries coming from the yard. It was like something or someone was trying to reach out to us. We didn't tell anyone, and whenever we would ride our four-wheelers near the property, my neighbor would come outside and stand by the fence. If we stopped or drove by, he'd say, "You better be careful, we wouldn't want an accident or for you to get hurt." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine, and I started avoiding that area for a while. Later, I found out that his son had died in that house, and everything started to make sense. The strange occurrences, the vehicles, the music, it all added up. We still don't go back to that place. Other weird things kept happening, like hearing the sound of a car engine running, followed by a loud crash, but nothing after that. Sometimes, we'd hear voices that we couldn't understand, and shadows moving in the corners of our eyes. This wasn't just me and my friend. 2 other friends and my cousin also saw and heard things. It was like the house was haunted by more than just memories. It was as if something still lingered there, trapped in time. It all started when I was about 9, and I was slowly being allowed more freedom to explore my small village. Me and my friends would spend our summer holidays exploring places no one had really been to, or so we thought. Of course, we didn't go far, usually no more than 4 miles from home. Sometimes we'd get chased off farmers' land, but it didn't stop us from going back. We always had my husky, Wolfie, with us. He was our bodyguard, I guess. One day, while wandering around the outskirts of the village, we came across a path we had passed many times before. It wasn't new, but something about it seemed different that day. We decided to check it out, even though it looked pretty dull, an old road with bushes lining the sides, and a house a bit down the way. We walked for a while and came across a field full of junk, which we played in for about half an hour. After that, we stumbled upon a cornfield, and it felt like a relief, like we'd found a hidden spot. The corn was tall, taller than our heads, and it had a warm, comforting glow. We decided to play a game of hide-and-seek, and I, of course, used Wolfie to cheat. He was great at tracking people down. After a few rounds I was it, and Wolfie was leading the way through the thick corn. As we moved forward, he suddenly froze, whimpering and pulling back. I had never seen him act like that. Then, out of nowhere, the temperature dropped sharply, and I felt an intense cold. It went from about 20 degrees to freezing, and I was shivering uncontrollably. Suddenly, a black figure swooped past me in the next row of corn. Wolfie yanked me to the ground, his collar breaking free as he bolted off into the distance, terrified. I lay there, confused and dazed, when I heard Clark, one of my best friends, scream. I rushed to find him, and when I did, he was on the ground, shaking and rocking back and forth. He didn't even notice me at first. I stood there, unsure of what to do, until I called for Angus and Chelsea. Clark suddenly turned to me, his eyes wild, and shouted for me to stay away. Then, without warning, he picked up a rock and threw it at me, hitting me in the head. It didn't hurt as much as I expected, it was more the shock that got to me. I turned and ran, not even thinking clearly. Halfway through, I saw Angus and Chelsea, holding Wolfie. They had managed to get his collar back on. I told them to run, and we all sprinted away. Normally, I was the slowest runner, but that day, I was miles ahead of them. I ran for about an hour until I reached the end of the long path, collapsing on the pavement, out of breath, with Wolfie nuzzling into me, panting heavily. After a while, Angus and Chelsea caught up, but Clark was nowhere to be seen. We waited for him for 2 hours, sitting in silence, until we finally saw a figure stumbling out onto the road. It was Clark, but his face was badly torn up, and his clothes were in tatters. I ran toward him, but once again, he shouted at me to stay away. Chelsea asked him what was wrong, and he finally spoke. He said a man in the field had told him I would be the cause of someone close to him dying, and that a woman in rags had attacked him. That was the last time we spoke to Clark. He became a stranger to us, just another face. Not long after, my mom and Clark's mom, who were friends, had a meeting at our house. I was outside, playing on my bike when I heard a car coming around the corner, speeding toward me. Clark's mom ran up and pushed me out of the way, but she was hit by the car. She passed away 2 days later in the hospital. 2 years later, I was at school, in the bathroom throwing up, when Clark suddenly burst in, grabbed me by my hair, and dragged me across the floor. He was shouting. He said it would happen! Over and over. Angus came in and managed to pull Clark off me and hold him back while I picked myself up and ran for help. After that, we never saw Clark again. He moved away the next day, and I later found out he had gone to Texas and tried to take his own life, but fortunately he survived. I miss Clark. I still think about him, and the memories of that day in the field haunt me. I'll never go back there though. Something evil was in that place, something that followed Clark and me. The whole experience was enough to make me avoid it forever. In 1987, I was living in a house in Atlanta with 4 roommates. We stayed there for just over a year, and during that time, we all experienced things that led us to believe the house was haunted. The house was very old, built shortly after the Civil War, when Atlanta had been destroyed by Union forces. It was a large Victorian home in Inman Park, a historic area of Atlanta. At the time, we were all in our 20s, trying to build our careers. So, sharing the rent on a big, 5-bedroom house with a basement seemed like a great deal. About a week after moving in, We were all asleep when we were suddenly woken up by screaming from our roommate, Hannah. We rushed to her room, where she said she had woken up to see a dark figure of a man standing by her bed. When she screamed, the figure walked out of the room. She was terrified. My other roommate and I checked the house inside and out, but found nothing. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. and we couldn't explain it. We tried to convince Hannah it was just nerves from the new house, but she was sure she had seen something and refused to be alone in the house after that. 2 weeks later, something else strange happened. We were all asleep when a loud crash woke us. In the hallway, we found that a full-length mirror mounted on the bathroom door had shattered into hundreds of pieces. The frame was still attached to the door, but the glass was broken. We couldn't figure out how it happened. The house didn't shake, and there was no traffic outside to explain it. Later, other odd things started happening. One time, I was alone watching TV when 3 candles on the mantel suddenly fell to the floor, as if someone had knocked them off. Another time, personal items, like car keys, would go missing, only to turn up later in places we hadn't left them. On occasion, we heard strange tapping noises coming from the attic or basement, even though we knew no one was up there. The most unsettling experience happened a couple of months later during a small party. A guest, who had never been to our house before, was exploring on her own when she ran back upstairs, claiming she saw a man standing in the basement. She said when she called out to him, he disappeared. We all went down to check but found no one there. It was odd because the basement had only one entrance, and no one could have snuck past us. After about 6 months, things seemed to quiet down. The strange events stopped happening, and we began to convince ourselves we had imagined some of it. But one night, toward the end of our time there, my wife and I met a couple at a restaurant. When we mentioned we lived in Inman Park, they asked which street. When we told them, they said they had lived on that same street, and then they asked, "Have you seen the ghost yet?" We were stunned. They had lived in the exact same house we were renting, and they had experienced similar strange events. This was the first time we'd heard anyone else mention the ghost, and it confirmed what we'd been feeling all along. After that, I stopped dismissing ghost stories and started to take them more seriously. Hi, my name is Ruby. I'm 25, and I live in Los Angeles, California. To be honest, I'm really fascinated by the afterlife. I've spent a lot of time reading and researching true stories about the paranormal, trying to learn as much as I can. I don't doubt at all that it's real. Over the years, I've had a few experiences myself, some brief, but definitely strange enough to make me believe. I'd like to share one of the most incredible ones with you. About 2 years ago, I took over my stepmother's daytime job. The job was to look after an elderly woman named Margie for about a month. The arrangement was that I'd stay with her in her home, which seemed fine since the Baca family was incredibly kind. At first, everything was great. I really enjoyed spending time with Margie. She had a funny personality, although she had senile dementia. Every morning, I'd wake her up and take her to the restroom, and on the way, she would always stop and point at something, saying, "Look." But when I looked, I saw nothing. I just smiled and went on with what I had to do. That was the strangest part of the whole routine, at least at first. By the second week, though, things started to get weird. One night, I brought my portable DVD player and decided to watch a John Lennon documentary. I ended up falling asleep while it was playing. I suddenly sneezed, and about 4 seconds later, I heard a voice distinctly say, "Bless you." I jumped up, scared out of my mind. I rewound the DVD, thinking maybe the documentary had included that line, but it wasn't there. I got up and looked out into the dark, quiet hallway, but everyone was asleep. No one was around. The voice I heard was definitely male, and the next morning, I ran the DVD again just to make sure. No "bless you" this time. I didn't know what to make of it, but I decided to leave it at that. Then, another night, I had a strange experience. I was about to groom my eyebrows, and I put my tweezers on the bed. But then, I got a phone call and got distracted. When I came back, the tweezers were gone. I searched the whole room, under the bed, in the closet, even shook out every piece of bedding, but they were nowhere to be found. 10 minutes later, still confused, I asked my boss, Paul, if he had borrowed them. He hadn't. When I returned to my room, I found the tweezers right in the middle of my bed, exactly where I had been looking. I was in shock, and honestly, I was a little scared. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. Finally, on my last week there, I had another strange experience. I woke up early, like usual, and started making my bed. It was a queen-size bed with 3 layers of sheets. I tucked in the right side, and when I walked around to the left side to tuck it in, I was shocked to find it was already neatly tucked in. I freaked out. I looked around the room and, without thinking, I shouted, "Thank you, can I help you with something?" But there was only silence. I was shaken, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, I decided to ask Paul about it. He told me that before he bought the house, 2 lesbians had lived there, and they had warned him that the house was full of spirits, though they were harmless. He told me that he had lived in the house for 20 to 30 years with his wife and children. After his wife passed away in 1999, Paul believed that her spirit still roams the house, helping out and cleaning like she used to. The room I stayed in had once been his 2 older sons' room, so he believed she spent a lot of time there. I felt much better after he told me that, and I was actually pleased to have been in her presence. When I was about 14 or 15, my parents went out for dinner, leaving me at home to watch the dogs. We had 2 toy poodles, who were unusually calm for their breed. They only barked when something unfamiliar approached. I was sitting on the computer, talking to a friend from Sylvan Lake, when I suddenly heard something crash, like glass shattering. This happened while my parents were still home, so I immediately dropped the phone and ran upstairs to check on my mom. She had rheumatoid arthritis, so she was prone to falls and couldn't always prevent them. When I asked her if she'd broken anything, she said she heard the glass shatter too. Even my friend on the phone asked what had happened. I had no idea, so I ran around the house checking for broken glass. There was nothing, no sign of anything being broken. A couple of hours later, when my parents went out, I was alone in the living room with the dogs. I always felt a bit uneasy being in the house by myself with so many dark rooms, but I usually managed by staying in one spot. I lay on the couch with the dogs next to me, trying to relax. Then I heard something that sounded like footsteps outside the French doors to the living room. The dogs' ears perked up, and they got up and started sniffing under the door, clearly sensing something. Then I heard a soft whimper, almost like a child crying. I stood up to check, but when I looked through the glass, I saw something sitting there. It looked like a figure in a white shirt, reminding me of an infant, and I froze. I couldn't bring myself to open the door. The dogs were now whimpering, sniffing, and growling at the door. I panicked and called my mom. I told her what was happening, and she told me to stay calm. She said they'd be home in about 15 minutes, but I kept pressing her. I reminded her of what she always said. "If the dogs notice it, it's real." She agreed, and then I heard my dog bark loudly. My mom promised she'd be right there. Not even 15 minutes later, as they were opening the garage door, all the lights in the house suddenly turned on, before they even stepped inside. I started crying, ran to my mom when she came in, and held on to her. After that night, I didn't experience anything like it again. Years later, just before my mom passed away when I was 18, she finally told me something I had no idea about. She confessed that strange things had been happening in the laundry room. The dryer door would always be found open, even though it locked tightly when it started. She used to come downstairs and yell at me, thinking I'd opened it during the drying cycle. I never thought much of it, writing it off as her being a bit quirky. Little did I know, she was experiencing something strange too. After she passed, I had a strange comfort knowing she was still around. For about 6 months, every morning at 6:30 a.m., I'd hear her shuffling into the kitchen in her slippers, opening cupboard doors to make her morning tea. At first, I thought it was just me missing her, But then two of my friends separately woke me up on different occasions, saying they'd heard the same sounds, someone walking around upstairs and hanging out in the kitchen. It was as if she never really left. This happened during a camp trip to Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey, on June 27. I was there with my friends, and we all wanted to go on Kingda Ka, the world's fastest roller coaster. I was going to try it, but when we got to the front of the line, I chickened out. 5 out of the 7 kids in my group went, but my counselor didn't join them either. As I stood by the exit gate, watching, one of my friends asked if she could sit next to someone because there was an extra seat. The person next to her said sure, but when she sat down, she couldn't. Something or someone seemed to be blocking her from sitting. She didn't think much of it at the time, but I saw it. The seat seemed to pull down on its own, strapping itself in. My friend, who was always screaming on rides, didn't notice anything but I did. I remember hearing the ride operator give a strange look at the seat before checking everything and sending the train off. Up they went, soaring 150 feet in the air at lightning speed. From the ground, I could hear my friends' screams echoing from the top. When they returned, I asked how it was, and they all said, "Awesome!" But then we had to wait for the last 2 people in our group. When they got in line, the seat that had been empty before was still locked in place, just like it had been before. That's when I decided to take out my phone. I thought maybe if there was a ghost, it would show up on the camera. I turned my phone to camera mode, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Sitting in the locked seat was a figure, a 16-year-old boy wearing a park uniform. He had his arms crossed, looking annoyed. I stared at him, stunned, unable to even show my friends what I was seeing. Then, to my shock, I saw him get up, open the gate, walk past me, and head straight to the controls. He pressed the button, and moments later, the ride's computer started malfunctioning. The workers were confused, saying the system wasn't letting the train go because it thought some seats weren't locked in, even though they were. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. But we didn't let it ruin the ride. My friends got on again, and everything worked fine the second time. You'd think that would be the last time I saw that ghost, but it wasn't. The next time we went to Kingda Ka, I saw him again, sitting on the roof of the building where the trains were. My counselor went to the bathroom, and while no one was looking, I called out to him. "Hey!" I said. To my surprise, he came down. I asked him to sit next to me so I could talk before my counselor came back. His name was Ricky. He told me he used to work at the park, but died 2 years ago during the first test run of Kingda Ka. He said no one wanted to ride it, but he was brave enough to volunteer. He sat in the same seat I had seen him in before. They got everything ready, and Ricky gave the ready signal. The ride went as planned until it reached the top. But when it reached the peak, the train didn't have enough speed and stopped. Then it rolled backward at a crazy speed, about 365 miles per hour, with Ricky still on it. The ride operator didn't realize it until they got back to the station, but by then, Ricky had died. They held a burial for him, but Ricky told me that he stayed around to make sure the ride was safe. He didn't want anyone else to experience the backward roll that had killed him. As for the incident with the seat being locked and the computer malfunctioning, he said it was because he'd been so frustrated with the girl screaming next to him. I told him that was my friend, and he seemed to relax and said, "It's okay now." After that, Ricky went back on the ride, and I never saw him again. If you've never been to Six Flags Great Adventure, you're missing out on more than just the rides. There's also a sign at Kingda Ka that reads, "On occasion, Kingda Ka's train will not go over the hill. This is a normal occurrence. If it doesn't, it will safely go back down the hill slowly and stop in its starting place and be ready to be launched again." I now wonder if Ricky is still watching over the ride, making sure everything runs smoothly. This happened 10 years ago when I was 19. I met a girl named Lynn through a job placement agency, and we quickly became close friends. Lynn was living with another girl at the time, but she often complained about her roommate and eventually moved in with my family. After a few weeks, we decided to find a place of our own and soon found a basement apartment. Lynn had an interest in the occult, nothing extreme, just things like tarot cards and burning candles, but it never bothered me. About a month after we moved in, our landlord, Susan, came downstairs to do laundry one afternoon, and somehow, we ended up talking about ghosts. Susan mentioned that she thought the place was haunted by her deceased mother, among other spirits. At the time, I wasn't too concerned about it. I didn't believe in ghosts, so it didn't really bother me. A couple of weeks later, around 12 a.m., Lynn came into my room and woke me up. She stood at the foot of my bed and said, "There are ghosts in this place, and they don't like you very much, so I would watch myself if I were you." Then she left. I was confused and disturbed by her words, but I didn't get out of bed immediately. I decided to go into her room to check on her, but she was fast asleep. I wondered if it was a prank, or if I just imagined the whole thing. The next morning, I asked Lynn about it, and she didn't remember saying anything like that. I chalked it up to a strange dream. About 3 weeks later, Lynn and I were watching TV before bed. Since I had to wake up early for work, I decided to go to bed earlier than usual. But something woke me up around 2 a.m. It wasn't a person, it was more like something snapped me out of my sleep, and I instantly felt this overwhelming sense of unease, like I wasn't alone. I got up, went to the bathroom, but still felt uncomfortable. I decided to go into the living room to watch TV for a while. About 10 to 15 minutes later, the living room suddenly became freezing cold. It felt like a rush of wind passed by my ear, as though a window was open, but all the windows and doors were closed. It was the middle of winter. Then I started hearing chattering or whispering sounds in my ear. The whispers circled around me, taunting me. I tried to ignore it, but the voices kept getting louder. I was completely freaked out, and I had no idea what was happening. Was I hallucinating? Scared out of my mind, I did the only thing I could think of. I prayed to God. I wasn't religious, but I prayed desperately. "Please, God, make it stop. I'm scared. Please make it stop." Suddenly, everything went silent. The chattering, the whispering, and the wind stopped just as quickly as it had started. There was an overwhelming sense of relief, and I was able to get up and go back to bed as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., rushed to get ready for work, and couldn't wait to leave the apartment. I felt relieved to be out of there, and I ended up staying with my boyfriend's parents for the next few weeks because I was too scared to sleep in the apartment. Eventually, I moved back home and never stayed in that place again. Looking back, I still don't know what happened that night, but I'll never forget the fear I felt in that apartment. The whole experience shook me to my core, and I've never been able to shake that feeling. A year after my mother passed away, I became close to my thrill-seeking friend, Beth. We spent a lot of time in a small patch of forest behind her house. Every time we went there, I'd dream of the forest that night, and my mother would be there, just staring at me. One evening, after coming back from the woods, I was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. I suddenly felt like I was being watched. My mother had passed away in the room next to the kitchen, from cancer. I froze for a moment, feeling like stone. Just as I thought it was over, I heard a whisper, clear as day. "Don't go." It sounded so much like my mother, but since I didn't fully believe in ghosts at the time, I shrugged it off and went to bed. But that night, I dreamed of her again. She told me there was something horrible in the forest, then pointed at it. I looked and saw what appeared to be some kind of demon, lurking in the trees. The next day, I went back into the forest, ignoring my mother's warning. Beth and I found a long, man-made tunnel, like a sewer system, that many people were supposedly killed in when it was first built. We sat down to chat, but as it got darker, we kept the flashlight on, seeing how long we could stay out. The darkness got so thick, it was almost pitch black. I began hearing what sounded like children laughing, but I tried to brush it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. When I looked at Beth, though, she was staring into the tunnel, not saying anything. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't ignore how uneasy I was. Beth got up, saying, "Stay here," and left to check on the laughter. I stood frozen, too scared to move. The tunnel was so dark, I felt like I was being watched. It was like a deer caught in headlights. Then I heard footsteps behind me, like someone was near. A male voice whispered in my ear, "Don't turn around." I was so startled I turned around, but there was no one there. I glanced into the tunnel, and for a split second, I saw a white flash move across it. Beth came back into the tunnel, and I told her what had happened. We both agreed it was time to leave. We ran out of there, screaming, and kept running through the woods. But as we were leaving, we both heard a woman scream in pain. We didn't stop until we were home, too terrified to look back. After that night, I swore I'd never go into that forest again at night. I still visit it during the day, but I always feel like I'm being watched now. That was 2 years ago, and since then, I've had more psychic experiences. Often, they first show up in dreams before they happen in real life. I know I'm not imagining things, though. Beth heard everything too, and several of my friends have been with me when I've seen things I couldn't explain. I have a friend named Lisa, who's around 13 or 14. My sister Sarah knows her better, but I spent the night at her house once, and that's when I found out about the strange things happening there. Lisa's house is built oddly, shaped like a plane. The front door has its doorknob in the center, so they always use the side door. When you walk in, you go through a tiny room with a sliding door that leads into the kitchen. It's where we sat with some friends, including Erica, Sarah, and Lisa's little sister, Susan. We were on the laptop, checking MySpace and prank calling people when we heard a motion sensor light outside go off. The dog started barking like crazy. We thought it was just a car, so we shut the blinds and hid behind the cabinets. We eventually went to bed, but I heard something weird in the hallway that night. I'm not sure if it was a scratch or shuffle, but it felt odd. I ignored it and fell asleep. The next morning, I told Lisa, and she said it was probably the ghost. I was shocked, having no idea what she meant. Lisa explained that her house had always been haunted. Her younger sister, Susan, often needed someone to go with her through the house because she was scared. Lisa said she used to scare Susan by sneaking up behind her and making a loud cat-like hissing sound. But one night, while Lisa was lying in bed, she heard a real cat hissing, loud and clear, right next to her. It scared her so much she almost wet herself. After that, she stopped scaring Susan and never heard the cat again. Lisa also told me that her parents' bedroom was the most active place in the house. She said she'd seen strange things in the mirrors at night and ghosts in the bathrooms. One night, Susan was playing on her PSP and came into Lisa's room, excited about her high score. Lisa told her to go to bed and close the door, but when she woke up the next morning, the door was still open. When she asked Susan why she hadn't closed it, Susan looked confused and said she hadn't even been in her room. Lisa was baffled. Then Susan had a weird experience of her own. She was watching TV in the living room, staring at a dried fish on top of the TV. She noticed that the fish was staring in a different direction than before. When she looked back, the fish's eyes had moved. She was freaked out and told Lisa, but Lisa didn't believe her at first. But after hearing all of Lisa's stories, I'm starting to think it's not just her imagination. It's hard to ignore all these strange occurrences. We moved to a house in Waco, Kentucky, and my nieces lived right across from us. One night, I was on the computer, and my sister and 2 nieces were in our room. My bed was on one side, and they were sitting on my sister's bed on the other side. Suddenly, I heard my name being called out. I opened the door, and they were all pointing to my bed. I looked over, and the front of my bed was sunk in, like someone was sitting on it. They said they saw a young Indian girl holding a doll. Waco was once Native American ground, so this freaked me out. I told them to get out, and we went to the living room. My mother tried to explain it away, saying it was the pillow, but the whole side of the bed was sunken, not just the hole in the pillow. There were other strange things that happened too. My uncle died in our room from a heart attack. My sister said when she lied down, she'd see a figure by the fan, looking down at her. She said she had the feeling she should call his name, and when she did, the figure bent over and stretched out a hand like it was trying to touch her. In my mother's room, there was a constant feeling of evil, especially when the lights were off. One night, I got a new bed that was placed next to my sister's. From there, I could see into the living room. There's a small hallway from the kitchen to my mother's room, where she kept the washer and dryer. I was laying in bed when I saw a girl hunched over, standing at the front of the hallway, like she was crying. After that, other things began happening, like the feeling that the whole house was being watched. One night, my sister was sleeping on the couch, turned toward the wall, and she felt breathing on her ear and neck. She turned around and saw a little black dog, which looked like it barked but made no sound. It ran into the kitchen and disappeared. The next morning, she drew what it looked like, including how it was sitting. Another time, my sister was listening to her CD player while lying in bed. As she was almost falling asleep, she took off her headphones and set them beside her. Later, she heard the headphones being pulled up and down, making a scratching noise. After living there for 2 or 3 years, one night my granny was asleep in my room, and I was in my bed while my sister slept on the couch. I woke up several times that night to find the door slightly more open each time. By the last time I woke up, it was completely open. There was also a time I got up to use the bathroom, and when I opened the door, it felt like someone was behind it, pulling it open with me. It actually pulled me along. This also happened to my niece. One day, I put a recorder at the end of my bed, where the little girl had sat. When we checked the recorder later, it had turned off by itself. My mom kept dolls above her bed, and one night, my niece and I were lying down, watching TV when one of the dolls, a cowboy, fell. The doll seemed to be staring right at us. The doll is still in the same spot to this day. We never touched it. One time, my sister and my 2 nieces were in my mother's room, and my older niece suddenly stopped moving. Her arms were crossed over her chest, but her hands weren't holding them there. Something was holding them in place. My sister tried to pull her arms apart, but they wouldn't budge. It was as if something invisible was holding her. These experiences, over the years, were too strange to ignore. There was always a sense of something, or someone, watching, and it was something I could never fully explain. In 1980, I was attending Chipola Junior College in Marianna, Florida, living in the dorm and working at the reception desk on weekends. Most of the time, I was alone there for the entire weekend. One Sunday afternoon, my roommate and suite mates returned from their homes, and I was helping them unload their cars. They always brought back great groceries, and while doing that, I passed through the bathroom to put some of my roommate's things in our room. As I walked through the bathroom, I glanced to my right. The space was small, leading to the shower, and there, standing right by the shower entrance, was a young woman. She was medium height with long, straight dark hair, parted in the middle. She was wearing a blue and red rugby-style shirt, and her style reminded me of the early 70s. I immediately knew she didn't belong there, and as soon as I looked away and then back, she was gone. Excited, I ran to find my suite mates and roommate. I told them what I had just seen, expecting them to think I was crazy, but they didn't. We decided to ask Mrs. Ryan, the cleaning lady who'd been working in the dorm for years, if there had ever been a girl who had lived in our room and had died. The next day, we found Mrs. Ryan in the laundry room. I described the girl I had seen, and Mrs. Ryan said she remembered a girl fitting that description who had died in a car wreck. A few weeks went by, and I started thinking maybe I had just imagined the whole thing. But one weekend, I found out I hadn't imagined it after all. It was Saturday night, and I had been out with my cousin and a friend. We had a curfew of 2 a.m., but I was back by midnight, safely in bed. Around 1 a.m., I heard the water in the bathroom sink turn on. My suite mate was supposed to be out on a date with her boyfriend, so I assumed she had come back and left the water running. It stayed on for a long time. I got frustrated and decided to get up and turn it off. The next morning, I went into my sweet maid's room, but she wasn't there. I thought maybe she and her boyfriend had gone out for breakfast. When she came back in the evening, I asked her why she had left the water running the night before. She looked at me like I had lost my mind and asked me what I was talking about. I said, "You know, when you came in from your date last night, you turned on the water and left it running." She replied, "I never came into town last night. I was at my parents' house all weekend." That's when I realized whatever had happened that night wasn't a coincidence. In 1976, when I was 8 years old, we moved to Colts Neck, New Jersey, into a newly built house on about 1.5 acres of land. The town itself dated back to the 1700s, and our house was a large 6-bedroom colonial. My family was excited about the move, especially since we were a large family, and my 2 older brothers got the downstairs bedrooms, which were off the wing of the garage. For the first year, everything seemed normal, until my brother Mike started complaining about noises outside his bedroom window. At first, he thought it was just the wind rustling bushes and scraping against the siding. But my mom was skeptical because there were no bushes in the back of the house. Over time, the noises escalated, soft thuds, then sliding sounds, like someone baling hay against a barn wall. Mike didn't seem to mind the noises at first, but when his closet doors started opening by themselves, he got scared. He tried telling our parents, but they were dismissive since no one else had experienced anything. My tough, 17-year-old brother even started sleeping with the lights and his TV on. Then, things began disappearing and reappearing in strange places. Car keys would vanish from the table, only to turn up in the kitchen cabinets. My brother's watch disappeared for 2 weeks, only to reappear under a box of Christmas decorations in the garage. Even my grandmother's false teeth went missing, never to be found again, and they weren't in her mouth. When my oldest brother Rene left for college, I started staying in his room sometimes. He had a great TV and stereo system, and the room was often cold. When I slept there, I'd have incredibly vivid dreams, so real that they almost felt like memories. On several occasions, I'd wake up freezing, only to find the blankets on the floor at the foot of the bed. Despite that, I loved the room until one weekend when my brother's girlfriend came to stay. At breakfast one morning, she asked my dad if he had gone into the bedroom the previous night. My dad said he hadn't, and Renee went quiet. She then told us a strange story. She had woken up to a man's voice calling her name. When she responded, there was no answer. Thinking it was just a dream, she went back to sleep, but the voice called her again. This time, she saw the figure of a man standing over her. He was tall and thin, with sharp features, wearing a floppy-brimmed hat and a frock-like coat. She couldn't see his eyes, but he was glowing faintly with a bluish aura. He stood for a moment, then walked to the foot of the bed and passed through the wall. She thought it was a dream and went back to sleep. My brother Rene went pale at hearing this. He hesitated, then admitted that he had seen the same figure a few weeks earlier, right before he left for college. He had never told anyone because he was afraid we'd think he was crazy. His girlfriend was upset that he hadn't told her, especially since she had slept in the same room. After that, night lights became a permanent fixture in that room. A few weeks later, my mom had her own encounter. She was in the kitchen when she turned to place something on the counter. As she did, she saw a little girl dressed in period clothing, a bonnet and all, staring out the picture window. As soon as my mom saw her, the girl vanished. Colts Neck is an old town, and Phalanx Road, where we lived, was once a major thoroughfare for early settlers. Archaeologists would dig in the area and find old glass medicine bottles, farming tools, and remnants of old homes. Back in the woods near the reservoir, there was an old grave monument. I was too young to remember the details, but I recall it being very old and out of place in the undeveloped woods. Was the girl my mom saw a spirit of someone who had lived on the land? Perhaps a farmer or his daughter? Or had they died in the rumored fire at Phalanx and didn't know they were gone? We'll never know. We moved out in 1984, and I often wonder if the people who took our place have had similar experiences. My mom passed away in that house in 1983, and I sometimes wonder if she left her own impression there. That house opened my eyes to the mysteries that can't be fully understood or solved. It taught me that some things remain beyond our comprehension. In 1976, when I was about 9, my family and I moved into a small, older house in Omaha. The house had a unique layout, with a cement slab foundation and a single door that opened directly into a large kitchen. Down a hallway, there was a bathroom and laundry room, and at the end of the hall, a staircase led to the second floor. Upstairs, my grandpa had one bedroom, and my parents had another. My sister and I shared a sun porch that was converted into a bedroom. One evening, around 11 p.m., my sister and I were getting ready for bed. She was in the bathroom, and I was sitting on a small step outside the bathroom door, waiting for her to finish. Suddenly, I heard her scream. When I rushed into the bathroom, I saw a man's face pressed against the window curtain. He had long, light brown hair, a beard, and a mustache. He was wearing a bright red velvet cloth around his shoulders, and there was a strange, glowing aura around him. The entire room seemed to glow with this light. The man said, "Do not turn on the lights, I will not hurt you." But I quickly turned on the lights, and the figure disappeared. I tried to convince my sister it was just a joke or our imagination, but I was terrified. Later that night, around 1 a.m., the house erupted in chaos. We heard doors slamming upstairs, the TV turning on and off, and lights flickering. An old bed on wheels in the living room began sliding across the floor, blocking the doorway. My mom and grandpa tried to move it, but it wouldn't budge. Then, everything stopped as suddenly as it had started. We all ran downstairs, but no one could explain what had happened. After a while, we went back to bed, hoping the night was over. But it wasn't. At 3 a.m., the house seemed to come alive with noise again. We heard doors opening and closing, faucets turning on and off, and even the gas stove burners igniting and turning off on their own. My dad and grandpa ran downstairs to investigate, but I followed them, holding on to my grandpa's robe. Eventually, everything stopped, and the front door was wide open. My parents grabbed my sister and me, and we ran outside. After a while, they decided they weren't going to let whatever was haunting the house chase us out. We went back in, but my sister slept with my parents, and I slept with my grandpa. There were many other strange incidents in that house, but we moved out about 6 months later. Over the years, I've driven by the house several times, and I know it has changed owners and renters many times since we left. At the top of the hill near the house, there was a small, mysterious church that was rumored to have been used for satanic rituals. It was torn down about 20 years ago, but I never knew much more about it. I don't know if it was connected to the strange events in the house, but I do know that living there opened my eyes to things I can't fully explain. It all started after my roommate and I stopped being friends, and I bought my first house. It was a small, charming place built in 1954 and had been abandoned from 1979 until about 1991. From the moment I saw it, I fell in love. It had a lovely retro feel to it. The first thing I noticed that seemed odd was how lifeless the yard was. There were no birds, no squirrels, no animal sounds at all. The place had a strange, eerie silence. In my first week living there, I found something that truly unsettled me. A can of soup had somehow made its way from the kitchen cabinet to behind my pillow. I hadn't had any guests, and I couldn't figure out how it had ended up there. About a week later, around 2:30 a.m., I was fast asleep when the doorbell rang 4 loud, distinct times. Half asleep, I went to the door, but no one was there. I assumed it was the kids next door playing pranks. But when I glanced at the doorbell, I was shocked to find the button was missing and the whole mechanism looked broken. I tried ringing the bell, but it wouldn't work. That sent a wave of fear through me, and I ended up sleeping with the light on for the next 2 nights. After living in the house for a few months, With a few more odd things happening, I decided to invite over a lifelong friend of mine, Gary. Gary had never been interested in the paranormal. We'd known each other since we were kids, and it just wasn't his thing. Before we went to my house, we had lunch together, and everything seemed normal. His attitude and color were fine. But as soon as we got inside, I noticed something was off. His complexion became pale, and he started getting agitated over little things. He was swearing more frequently, and it felt like he had turned into a completely different person. At around 8:30 p.m., Gary suddenly stood up, walked into the guest bedroom, and went to bed without saying a word. I thought it was strange but shrugged it off, and I went to bed myself shortly after. Around 1:10 a.m., I woke up to the sound of Gary violently vomiting in the bathroom. I rushed to help him, and when I walked in, I found him completely naked, curled into a ball. He was mumbling something like, This place is not right." I panicked and called 911, thinking he might be on something, like LSD. The next morning, when I visited him in the hospital, I asked what happened. He told me that the doctors found no explanation for his extreme vomiting or the delusions. The EMTs said he had started to come back to reality just before they arrived at the hospital. Gary told me that from the moment he stepped into the house, he felt incredibly strange. He said he kept getting grotesque and disturbing thoughts and images in his head and felt a heavy presence looming over him. After that night, he refused to return to the house. This incident deeply disturbed me. I stayed in the house for another 6 months, living with unexplained noises and objects moving to strange places. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Whatever was in that house was too much to bear. I sold the house and moved out within a month. To this day, when I drive by the place, I feel a sinking feeling in my stomach, and all I want to do is run. We moved into our townhouse in El Monte, California about 4 years ago. The townhouse was fairly new, less than 20 years old, though El Monte itself is one of the older communities in Southern California. At night, when I was lying in bed, I'd often hear footsteps running up and down the stairs. At first, I didn't think much of it. Our neighbors shared a wall with us, and they had 2 younger children. I assumed it was their son running up and down the stairs, which happened to share the same wall as ours. But it sure did sound like someone was running up our own stairs. Like many people, we'd sometimes notice items in our house disappearing, usually things we had just left in plain sight, like on the kitchen table or counter. We'd search high and low, but couldn't find them. Then, a couple of days later, they'd reappear. Sometimes they'd be lying in plain sight again, but other times they'd be under a newspaper or a magazine, even though we were sure we had checked that spot already. Last week, my wife woke me up around 2 a.m. when she came to bed. She asked me what I had done with the book she'd been reading earlier that afternoon when she took her nap. I hadn't seen it when I went to bed, but since she insisted on reading before sleep, even at 2 a.m., I got up and started searching for it. The book was nowhere to be found. After a while, my wife reluctantly abandoned the search and climbed into bed. Over the next few days, we'd occasionally look for the book. I even crawled under the bed and checked under the bedside tables several times. We both searched the same areas multiple times, but somehow, the book wasn't turning up. It felt like we had looked everywhere, but maybe, just maybe, it would be there this time. Then, last night, my wife excitedly showed me the book. She had found it under her bedside table. The gap under our bedside tables is fairly high, so anything under them should have been immediately noticeable. Yet, despite me having been on the floor several times, at the perfect angle to spot it, I never saw it there. What was more surprising was that the book wasn't lying flat. It was standing upright, like it would be on a bookshelf. This struck me as odd, since we'd both been actively looking for the book and had missed it completely. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I was woken by a tap on my shoulder. I turned toward my wife and asked her what was wrong. She didn't respond, her head buried in her book. Still half asleep, I asked again, a little annoyed, "What did you want?" She raised her head, confused, and said, What do you mean? I felt a tap on my shoulder, I replied. I never touched you, she said. I was annoyed at being woken up in the middle of the night, but I have the ability to fall back asleep quickly, so I just rolled over and went back to sleep. The more I thought about it, the stranger it all seemed. Could I have imagined the tap on my shoulder, a leftover piece of a dream? I wasn't sure, but it felt real. Then there was the question of the book. How on earth had it stood up, under the bedside table, for an entire week, without either of us noticing? It wasn't the first item to disappear and reappear in our house, and I'm sure it won't be the last. Did we just overlook it, unable to see what was right in front of us? Or had something, or someone, borrowed the book for a time? The whole thing still lingers in my mind, and I can't quite shake the feeling that something strange is going on in our house. When I was a child, we lived in a very unusual house in El Monte, California, built in the log cabin style but much larger, like the Ponderosa. The house was over 100 years old, and while it had been converted into 2 apartments, one upstairs and one downstairs, there was still a haunting quality to it. We lived downstairs, and our upstairs neighbor was an elderly woman, Ms. O'Kelly. The house was located on several acres, far from the main roads, and although modern conveniences like electricity and running water had been added, the remnants of an older time were still everywhere. Rusty farm tools lay idle in overgrown fields, and old barns and outbuildings were filled with tools that hadn't been touched in decades. Despite all the modern additions, there was something about the house that felt different, even as a toddler. The fields around the house were quiet, with no birds or squirrels, and the land felt still, almost as if it had been waiting for something. As I grew older, I started to notice more. The house felt like it was always alive with activity, but not in a way I understood at first. The first thing that caught my attention was the strange sounds. At night, I'd hear what seemed like footsteps running up and down the stairs. But it wasn't until later that I realized those weren't just sounds from the house or from Ms. O'Kelly's family. These were the sounds of people working, voices shouting, boots thudding on the floor, dishes clattering as they prepared meals. We'd hear these noises throughout the day, almost like a normal workday, only there was no one there. The most distinct was a woman's voice, which we called Granny, shouting, "Get AP! Get AP!" It was a call to her sons or husband, waking them up to begin their workday. And though the words were a bit jumbled, it was unmistakable. Other sounds followed, like the rhythmic thumping of someone churning butter, the slow tapping of a spinning wheel, and the creaking of buckboard wagons as they made their way down the dirt lane. These noises would stop if you entered the room or the area, but as soon as you left, they would pick up again. It felt like there was a whole family of spirits working around us. I didn't realize they were ghosts. I thought they were just out of sight, maybe in the next room or outside, working in the fields. After a while, my grandmother became ill, and we started spending weekends away. When we returned, Ms. O'Kelly told us there had been a whole group of people downstairs, talking and laughing, voices we couldn't understand, but one phrase stood out. She said they were always jibber-jabbering, but we could hear the words, "Get AP! Get AP!" as they started their day. She told us that when we weren't home, the noise would carry on all night, and she would never get any sleep. I asked my mother what she did when we first moved into the house and realized it was haunted. She answered calmly, "We knew it was haunted when we moved in. The Wilsons had lived there before us and told us about it, but they said the ghosts wouldn't hurt us." Her only complaint was the noise. The constant sounds often went on all night, and she found it hard to sleep with it. There were other strange occurrences too, like lanterns floating through the woods at night at the height of a person holding them. My mom didn't know what to make of it at the time, but as I got older, we talked more about the house and the ghosts. When I was older, my mom and I decided to visit the house again, about 40 years after we left. As we neared the old site, I suddenly said, "I can feel it. We're close." My mom said, "So can I." Even though the house was long gone, replaced by a mall and new homes, the energy of the place still lingered. We didn't see anything or hear anything unusual, but we both felt it, the same presence we had known as children. Although nothing appeared to us that day, I still wonder about the spirits that once inhabited that old house. Maybe they're gone, but in some ways I think they're still there, just beyond what we can see. I work as a security guard in New Zealand, and our company was hired to provide overnight security for the construction of a new retirement home. Over the course of our shifts, 5 different security guards, including myself, have reported seeing a dark shadow appear and disappear around the site. We were talking about it last night, trying to figure out how to describe what we've seen. The closest thing we could agree on is that the shadow looks like a human figure, dressed in a black robe, almost like the Grim Reaper, but without the sickle. Most of the time, the shadow just stands still, watching us. Sometimes it moves or runs before disappearing. One guard had an unsettling experience when he saw the shadow standing on the roof of a portacoms, just staring at him. He also smelled a strange burning flesh-like odor. As soon as the shadow noticed him looking, it vanished. Later that night, while doing his rounds, the same guard found a radio on the construction site blasting loud music. He knew no one had been there, so he couldn't explain how it got turned on. He turned it off, but when he came back an hour later, it was on again. He unplugged it, but just as he did, another radio down the hall, about 20 meters away, turned on. He turned that one off too and searched the entire site, but couldn't find anyone. He was really freaked out at that point. Another guard also saw the same dark shadow appear and disappear. Later, while sitting in his car, he closed his eyes for about 15 seconds. Suddenly, he heard loud knocking on his car windows. When he opened his eyes, no one was around. He was startled, especially since there was no way someone could knock on the window and run away that quickly without being seen. These experiences have been unnerving for all of us, and the shadow remains an unexplained mystery. It's made the job much more eerie and unforgettable. When I was growing up in Indiana, we were remodeling parts of our old house. We just peeled the wallpaper off around the stairway leading to my bedroom and applied a fresh layer of spackling compound to smooth out the plaster. The next day, we were planning to glue cork and mirror tiles on the walls, classic 70s style. One night, I woke up to go downstairs to use the bathroom. In my room, there was a rocking chair that the family cat, Rascal, liked to sleep in. With my glasses off, everything was blurry, and the only light came from the moon and a street light through the 2 windows in my room. One window was above the stairs. I thought I saw Rascal's fuzzy white shape in the chair, so I leaned down to pet him. But when I reached for him, my hand passed right through the fuzzy blob. My fingers touched the rough material of the cushion he would have been sleeping on. Suddenly, my hand was hit by a cold, tingling sensation, almost like an electrical charge, but it was freezing. The cold spread up to my wrist, and as I looked at it, it felt like the edges of the coldness were drawing blue from the room. The tingling intensified until my elbow started to ache. Then, whatever it was shot out of the chair, fast, like it had been startled. It moved across the room, an elliptical blob of bluish-white light. It didn't touch the floor and seemed to float, churning slightly as it moved. I was scared but, for some reason, decided to chase it. It sped over to the stairs, hovered above the steps, and then leaned into the wall before passing straight through it, disappearing outside the house. I ran to the window to try to catch a glimpse of it outside. I saw it briefly, darting above the hedges and tomato plants in the yard. Then it shot up into the sky, peeling backwards as it went, almost like it was turning inside out. By the time I lost sight of it, it was about 10 feet above me and moving across the neighbor's yard. It moved so fast, and it was weird. After a few minutes of staring into the sky, I realized I really had to pee, so I went downstairs, used the bathroom, and went back to bed. I didn't wake anyone up to tell them what had happened. It seemed pointless. The next day, when I went downstairs, I saw the spackling compound had dried and was ready for the tile work. But it was all scratched up, except it wasn't scratched like the cat's claws. The marks weren't straight or curved, but looked more like lightning bolts, jagged, almost methodical bursts. It looked like someone had been trying to write something but couldn't get the letters right. Here's the strangest part. When I looked at the marks, there were no thick or thin areas like you'd expect if someone had dragged their finger through the compound. Imagine drawing a Z with frosting. There's always a thicker part at the end where the frosting piles up, right? But with these marks, there was no heavy edge or end. The compound was displaced evenly, as if something had pushed outward from the center of each mark. It was smooth, uniform, and consistent. The marks looked like random scribbles, but they were too uniform to be just a mess. It almost seemed like it was some kind of writing, rushed maybe. My brother and I spent a long time studying the marks from every angle, even holding a mirror up to them to see if they looked different backwards. In the end, we had to cover them up with glue and tile. We never figured out what made those marks, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't the cat. That night, something definitely happened, and it was like a message or a warning, or maybe just a strange, unexplainable occurrence. When I was in 4th grade, my family moved into a house in Cypress, California. From the outside, it looked like any other house, but inside, things were different. The upstairs, which used to have 4 bedrooms, had been changed into one big loft. But there was something else in the house that only us kids seemed to notice. On our first day, while we were unpacking, we saw a spice rack slide across the kitchen counter and fall off the edge, crashing to the floor. We told our parents, but they didn't believe us. They thought one of us must have knocked it over. But strange things kept happening. The clock in the kitchen would sometimes jump off the wall and land on the refrigerator, 3 feet away. The TV and stereo would turn on by themselves, always tuned to static. We would hear scratching noises on the east side of the house, even though there were no trees or bushes there. My little sister and I often heard movement in the upstairs closet when no one else was there. Our parents thought we were just imagining things, but one night everything changed. My sister Kina, 2 of my other sisters, and I were in Kina's part of the loft watching TV when we began to hear music coming from the other side of the room, where my other sisters' beds were. They went to check it out, and as soon as they reached the stairs, it happened. From outside Kina's window, we heard a voice calling her name, in a scratchy whisper. It called her name 3 times, and by the 3rd time, we were already running down the stairs, followed by my other sisters. They were scared because when they reached the music boxes, the music had stopped. We ran to our dad and told him what had happened. He decided to check it out, and we followed him up the stairs. When he opened the curtains, everything went completely quiet. On the window were 2 smeared handprints, and hanging from a beam on the roof was a noose. My dad thought someone had tried to break in, so he called the police. After checking the house and the surrounding yard, the officers found nothing. They then told my dad something about the house's history. It turned out that the previous owners had a teenage daughter. One day, they came home early and found her body hanging from a noose outside that very window. The police said there were 2 smeared handprints on the window, just like the ones we had seen. That was all my dad needed to hear. We moved out that week, realizing the girl's spirit was still in the house and didn't want any other children there. I still drive by that house sometimes, and I always get the feeling that something is watching me. Now, if I ever hear something outside the window, I hesitate to look, afraid something might be watching me back. Ghosts are definitely not real. Those were my words before our trip to Baguio City for a leadership seminar. A group of US from school were heading to one of the most haunted places in the Philippines, Teachers Camp. It's famous for its old age and rumors that it was built on a war-related site. People say they see the ghosts of war veterans and enemy soldiers, and there are stories of women being kidnapped by spirits. I never thought I'd experience anything like that, but I was wrong. The first day of the trip was fun. We biked around the park and hung out in one of the delegates' parents' hotel rooms. I didn't really think about the camp where we were supposed to stay until I saw the hall in Teachers Camp. The place was huge, with many different halls, but of all the places we could have stayed, we were assigned to Whitehall, the oldest and the one in the worst condition. The floor creaked with every step, and because of a gap between the ceiling and the wall, we could hear everything from teachers talking to other people dragging their bags across the floor. The toilets barely worked, and every day, I dreaded going back to that hall at night. Finally, the first night came. As usual, I had trouble sleeping. I always have a hard time sleeping, whether I'm at home or in a creepy camp. Our room 109, had 4 other girls with me, and they were okay with the place, though they were a little disgusted by the broken toilets. I, on the other hand, couldn't sleep at all. I stayed awake until around 11 p.m., trying to fall asleep but kept thinking something might go bump in the night. I left the lights on for reassurance. Around 3 a.m., I woke up again. Screw sleep, I thought. Thankfully, I had brought a book from my sister, so I started reading, but I still felt paranoid. After a few minutes, I heard something. Footsteps. They were faint at first, but they got louder as they came closer. I stopped reading and waited, wondering if they would stop. But they didn't. The footsteps got louder, heading toward the room. I peeped outside but saw nothing. Still, the sound of the footsteps kept coming, stronger and closer. I went back to my bed and sat up, listening carefully. I tried to calm myself, thinking it might just be late guests coming in. But then the footsteps reached the entrance of our room, and they were so loud that I felt the bed move with each step. I freaked out and quickly hid under my blanket, praying as I did. My friends slept soundly, unaware of what was happening. I was terrified and feared I'd see something I'd never forget. The footsteps felt like they were coming toward my bed. Then they stopped. I finally gathered enough courage to peek out from under the blanket, and that's when I saw it, a white, shadowy figure with a bloodied face. It was only there for a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity before I rushed back under the blanket again. The footsteps continued, but they grew fainter and fainter until they disappeared, just like the figure. I was so scared I couldn't sleep. For the next few days, nothing else happened in room 109. I told my friends about what happened, but they laughed it off. I know what I saw, whether it was a ghost or just my imagination playing tricks. I still visit teachers' camps sometimes, and I still hear ghost stories about the place, some even similar to what I experienced. But reading about ghosts or hearing stories can never compare to the thrill of actually experiencing one. The summer after high school, I worked for my neighbor, who ran a contracting business. His company mostly did light remodeling, painting, carpentry, landscaping, building decks, stuff like that. The usual crew was him, his partner, me, and 1 or 2 friends, plus a laborer or 2 depending on the job's size. About halfway through the summer, we got a job cleaning up a house a few towns over. The house had been neglected for a while. We were tasked with repainting, fixing some squeaky floors and water damage, cleaning up the yard, and so on. It was a decent-sized house, and the job was expected to take a month. The homeowners weren't living there and planned to sell it. Most of the house had already been cleared out. The first few days, we cleared brush out of the yard to bring in our equipment for the exterior work. Once that was done, we split into 2 crews, one for the outside work and the other for the inside. Since it was summer and the house didn't have AC, the outside work was a bit more comfortable, so we rotated between working inside and outside. To give you an idea of the house's layout, when you walked in, there were large rooms immediately to the right and left. The staircase to the second floor was ahead and to the left. To the right, there was a small bathroom, and straight ahead was the kitchen and another large room. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. There was only 1 staircase to the second floor. We started working in the front rooms, and within an hour or so, our radio started acting up. It was an old boom box, a manual cassette player with a mechanical tuning knob. At least 3 times, the station changed on its own from the station we were listening to, 102.7, to other random stations. What was strange was that when the station changed, it was perfectly tuned in, and it happened so quickly, much faster than anyone could turn the knob, tune the station, and get away without being noticed. The radio didn't have preset stations. Twice, when this happened, I was in the room, and when my back was turned, the radio was in a spot where it would have been almost impossible for someone to change the station and then leave unnoticed. It wasn't near a window either. On a few occasions, the volume would randomly blast way louder than it should have been able to. We moved the radio to a different room, blaming it on bad power, and the problem stopped. Other odd things started happening too. Lights, including our portable floodlights, would turn on or off when we weren't near the switches. It wasn't a power cut or anything. It was like the switches were being thrown on their own. We also heard footsteps above us when we knew no one was upstairs. The strangest thing happened toward the end of the job. I was replacing molding in a second-floor bedroom. I had a big, heavy steel toolbox, one of those old craftsman ones, filled with tools, probably 30 to 40 pounds. I'd finished most of my work and was packing up when lunch arrived. It was raining, so we all sat in the main entrance near the stairs, eating. Everyone was accounted for. There were no strangers or people missing. We were joking around, talking about how the house was probably haunted because of all the weird stuff that had been happening, but no one took it seriously. It was mostly just fun speculation. While we were sitting there, a huge crash came from upstairs. One of the guys freaked out and bolted for the door. I followed him, and another guy came with us. We ran upstairs, and in the 3 seconds it took us to get there, no one could have gotten out of a room without being seen. Inside the room I had been working in, my toolbox had been thrown across the room. Its contents were scattered everywhere. The toolbox had been sitting on the floor, and it had been thrown about 10 feet. We checked the other rooms, but there was no sign of anyone. The window was closed because of the rain, and jumping out would have meant a 15-foot drop into some bushes. There were no ladders up on the house, and no one was outside. Everyone had been sitting with us during lunch, so there was no way anyone could have slipped past us. We were all shaken up, and for the last couple of days of work, nobody wanted to go into rooms alone. You could tell everyone was on edge. The boss told the homeowner about the strange happenings, but the homeowner just shrugged it off, like it was no big deal. A few years later, the house burned down, and one of the guys I worked with, who now lived in the town, sent me a story from the local paper. It turned out the previous owner had been a shut-in after his wife died. He barely left the house, which explained the neglect. He died about a year before we worked on the house, but no one found his body for at least 6 months. The people who hired us were his estranged son's family, who had inherited the house and were trying to sell it. The house changed hands a few times after that, with nobody staying for long. Over the years, it grew a haunted legend in the town. There were other strange things that happened while we were working there, but I've left some of the smaller details out. I'm not someone who really believes in ghosts, but some of the things that happen there defy any rational explanation. Just thinking about it gives me chills. None of us knew the story behind the house when we were working there, but after the toolbox incident, everyone was seriously on edge. This is a story I can hardly tell, but it's true, a strange twist of fate. It's something I've never fully understood, but all of it is real, and I can prove it. I grew up in North Terre Haute. As a kid, I would visit a local store called Stapleton's, which served lunch to school kids. It was tucked behind a gas station, across from a tavern called Jig's. The owner, Mr. Stapleton, was an intimidating man, rough-looking with a flat-top haircut, a raspy voice, and a no-nonsense attitude. I always felt like he was harmless, but something about him gave me a bad gut feeling. He and his wife lived near my house, not far from a gas station where we'd ride our bikes. Their home was one of the nicest in the neighborhood, and I often stopped in front of it, staring in wonder at the lights that glowed dimly at night, though I never saw anyone around. Fast forward to Thanksgiving morning, 1978 or 79. I watched Mr. Stapleton die. My father and I were headed to the IGA for my mother when we came across a horrible car accident. A kid I went to school with, who later became a coworker, had a Buick Wildcat with dual exhaust. He loved to drop it into low gear and nail the gas, just to hear the pipes roar. I'd ridden in that car a few times. On that morning, Mr. Stapleton was pulling onto Highway 41 when my friend, speeding in his car, made a dangerous move. He passed the car on the wrong side and T-boned Mr. Stapleton's vehicle, killing him instantly. Years went by, and I eventually forgot about the Stapleton house, which slowly fell into disrepair. I got married and, after the birth of my second child, bought a home near my parents. I remodeled it and made it our own. One day, I noticed the Stapleton house was having an estate sale. I went to check it out, taking my youngest daughter with me. I was interested in a rocking chair that was listed, but after walking around the house, I became fascinated by its old construction. The house, built in the 1960s, had so much potential. It felt strange in a way, but I brushed it off. With just 20% down, I bought the house, and I was shocked at how things would turn out. I spent months renovating the place, gutting most of the home and modernizing it. The house was big and beautiful, but it didn't take long for strange things to start happening. It started with noises, like someone walking across the floor, followed by a loud banging noise from the back door, as if someone had walked in. One night, my father and I were working in the basement when we heard footsteps. We called out but got no reply, so I went up a ladder to check. There was no one there, but we were confused and laughed it off. As I continued working late, things grew stranger. I started noticing cold spots in rooms, and I could follow them in and out of the rooms. At first, I thought it was just drafts, but these cold spots felt different. They would chill you to the bone. One hot summer evening, my German shepherd, Sam, began acting strange. She barked and growled at something I couldn't see. I thought nothing of it until I heard a loud bang from the master bedroom. I went to check, and the bathroom door had slammed shut. Sam was barking at it, but I blamed it on the drafts from the old house. Over time, the strange occurrences continued. One night, I was woken by the sound of someone walking down the hallway and twisting my youngest daughter's door handle. I thought it was my oldest daughter, who often sleepwalked, but when I checked, both girls were sound asleep. My youngest even told me the next morning that someone had been twisting the door handle. I played it off, but it left me feeling uneasy. Then, Sam began barking aggressively at the garage, just under our bedroom. I would scold her, but I soon realized that every time she barked, the basement window would be wide open. I bent the latch to prevent it from being opened, but one night, Sam barked, and the next morning, the window was open again. This got our attention. There were other unsettling occurrences, like glasses flying out of the kitchen cabinets in the middle of the night, and the bathroom door, despite my efforts to fix it, continuing to get stuck. One night, we heard someone enter through the back door and break a vase, but when I checked, the door was locked. I was angry and yelled, "We are a family and we live here now, we're good people, leave us alone." Things went quiet for a while, until one cold January night. We had spent the day playing in the snow and returned home in the evening. I backed my truck into the driveway and opened the garage to let Sam out. She greeted me happily, but then acted strangely, staying close to me as if something was wrong. I didn't think much of it until I saw her suddenly collapse and drop dead in front of me. I rushed her inside and, with my family, cried by the fireplace as we held her. But when I went to put the quads away, I saw that the basement window was open again. Sam had scratched at something on the wall near the window, and the marks made my blood run cold. I'll never forget that moment. After Sam's death, things seemed to settle down. But months later, in March, my wife and I were having issues, and we tried to make things work by attending Saturday Evening Massachusetts. As we stood at the door to leave, I started opening the laundry room door, and something on the other side began pushing against it. I fought with it for a while, then the door slammed shut. I burst it open in frustration, only to find no one there. My wife and kids witnessed this, and it was the final straw for me. I became afraid, and the house tore us apart. It changed me and our family forever. I moved out shortly after, and we divorced. My youngest daughter moved to the basement family room with her girlfriend, but she said the clocks wouldn't keep time, and the TV would turn on by itself. She and her girlfriend saw a lamp fly across the room and hit the wall above the bed. They moved upstairs that night. I sold the house soon after the divorce, and it sold quickly, in just 3 days. I've often wondered if the new owners have experienced any strange happenings. There's so much more I could tell, but I'm afraid people won't believe me or will mock me. The house is located in North Terre Haute, Indiana, at 3365 Crystal Avenue. I've thought about going back to talk to the new owners, but I fear opening a chapter one can't close. I truly saw figures and shadows out of the corner of my eye. The feeling was unmistakable, the presence of a ghost. In the 1980s, my lover and I moved from Parkdale in Toronto to 419 Sherbourne. Our new apartment was on the 3rd floor, though the door was located on the 2nd floor. We moved in with 3 cats and a dog. The apartment was a spacious 1-bedroom, with the bedroom at the top of the stairs, directly across from the kitchen. The apartment had a long hallway with the bathroom about 3/4 of the way down, and the living room at the end. The building was old, and the living room had a small kitchen sink area behind a wooden bookshelf. I was told the building used to be a rooming house, where each room was rented out separately. The first strange thing happened when we returned from a trip to London. We found a wooden cross that had been on the wall, now lying on the floor. One of our cats was in the bathroom, sitting on the windowsill, looking terrified. Our 2 Siamese cats, who always greeted us after being away, were hiding under the bed. It was odd because they'd never acted like that before. The door to our apartment was on the 2nd floor, and there was about 6 inches of space between the door and the first step. The stairs had carpet, but the cats discovered that the carpet under the first step could be pushed back, giving them access to the walls. To prevent them from getting stuck, I placed a small window screen between the door and the first step. My lover worked in a beauty supply shop and closed up at 6 p.m. every night. On several occasions I heard what sounded like our apartment door opening and someone coming up the stairs, but only to the 3rd step. The dog would hear it too and go to look with me, but there was never anyone there. One evening, I heard the door open, followed by footsteps coming up the first 3 steps. When I looked, there was no one there, but the screen I'd placed under the door was now lying on the 3rd step. I told my lover about it, but he just laughed it off, saying it was my imagination. A few days later, a friend of his came over around 4:30 p.m. We were sitting and having coffee, waiting for my lover to come home. The dog was in the living room, facing the hallway. My friend and I both heard the door open and someone walk up the first 3 steps. I checked the time, exactly 6 p.m., so it couldn't have been my lover. I looked at the dog, who had started wagging her tail but suddenly jumped to her feet. She began barking and growling, with every hair on her back standing up. My friend grabbed a large ashtray, thinking someone had broken into the apartment. We rushed to the hallway, but the dog blocked me, not letting me pass. She kept her eyes fixed on something about 6 feet off the ground, barking and growling all the while. My friend and I couldn't see anything, but the dog was clearly reacting to something. We searched the apartment and found the cats on the bed, their tails puffed up, their eyes wide. After we finished searching, our friend left, asking me to have my lover call him as soon as he got home. I took the dog outside, waiting for my lover. When he arrived, I told him what had happened, and our friend explained the situation to him. We then wrote a notice to the landlord saying we were moving out. As soon as we got the keys to our new apartment, I took the cats over. Normally, when cats are introduced to a new place, they hide, but this time, they ran around, playing and exploring. I went back to check the mail after we'd moved everything out. I took the dog with me, but when we reached the steps of the building, she refused to go up. I recently went on holiday for a week with my boyfriend and my parents to Fuerteventura, one of the Canary Islands. We rented a private villa, and from the moment we arrived, I immediately felt uncomfortable in the room my boyfriend and I were staying in. It wasn't a bad or frightening feeling, just something odd, an unsettling sensation I had never experienced before. I couldn't put my finger on why, but it felt off, as if something wasn't right. I'd never experienced anything supernatural before, so I wasn't sure what to make of it. After settling in, we sat down in the kitchen for coffee. I remember sitting at the table, staring into our room, almost as if daring someone or something to walk past the door. It was strange because at the time, I couldn't explain why I felt this way. I had no reason to be uncomfortable, but I just knew something was wrong. Over the course of the holiday, I kept waking up several times during the night, sometimes 4 or 5 times, with the overwhelming sense that someone else was in the room. I couldn't get a good night's sleep. One night, I woke up right on the edge of the bed, with that same third-person feeling. I noticed the bedside table next to our bed gently thudding against the wall. I watched it for a few seconds, wondering what could be causing it. I even moved away from the side of the bed just in case I was somehow causing the noise myself. But as I expected, the thudding continued. It wasn't violent, just a gentle thud. It didn't scare me at the time, though I was so tired that I just fell back asleep. The next morning, I woke up and the feeling that something wasn't right in the room was even stronger. But for some reason, I didn't mention anything to my boyfriend or my parents. After all, who would expect a modern Spanish villa to be haunted? On the second night, I woke up even more often than before, mainly because my back had gotten burned earlier in the day, and I was sore. I kept a bottle of after-sun lotion on the bedside table to keep applying it through the night. One time, when I woke up and leaned forward to rub the lotion into my back, I glanced into the long mirror we had on the wall by the bed. In the reflection, I saw something incredibly strange. Even though it was dark, I clearly saw the figure of a tall, thin man coming toward the mirror, as if he were reflected from the bathroom and stepping into the bedroom. He was wearing black with a long white frilly shirt running down his middle, like a dinner suit. His hair was odd too, shoulder-length, curled at the bottom in a bob-like style, and it was ginger. This all happened in a matter of seconds. I turned around quickly, but the room was dark and empty. I woke up my boyfriend to ask the time. It was 6:30 a.m. I asked him when it would start getting light, but he didn't know. I turned on the light, and eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I felt compelled to tell my boyfriend and parents everything that had happened. That night was our last in the villa. I kept the light on but couldn't get to sleep. I wasn't scared to be in the room, but I didn't want to see him again, and I was afraid of closing my eyes. It sounds silly, but since it was our last night, I was worried he might do something to mess with me. So, we ended up taking all the bedclothes into the living room and sleeping on the sofas. Nothing happened that night, and although I was still on edge and woke up a few times, I felt relieved to be away from the bedroom. A few weeks after we got back home, my boyfriend admitted that he had also experienced something. He told me that one night, while we were asleep, he had a quick dream, only about 4 seconds long, of a shadowy figure of a man crossing the bathroom to close the shower door. He woke up right after. He said he hadn't told me during the holiday because he didn't want to make my concerns about the man with ginger hair in our room seem worse. It was a strange experience, and even though I'm not sure what exactly happened, I can't shake the feeling that something really was there with us in that villa. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The events I'm about to share with you took place between 1990 and early 1995, when my family, my mother, father, older sister, and myself, lived in a house at 8 First Street. A unique thing about our town was that all the houses were leased for free to the residents. Our house had been empty since 1983 before we moved in early in 1990. It wasn't long before my younger sister, who was just 3 years old at the time, started talking about a woman she had seen in the living room. She described this woman as having blonde hair, but no face. At first, we didn't think much of it. After all, she was so young. But her persistence in telling the story, along with her fear of the backyard barbecue that she insisted needed to be removed, made us start to wonder if maybe it wasn't just her imagination. The first event that made us all question things happened about a month later. One afternoon, we were all in different parts of the house when the front door suddenly opened. We all heard my father's usual greeting, "Hello?" as he stepped inside. But when we all went to greet him, there was no one there. An hour later, we received a phone call from my father saying his car had broken down and that my mother needed to pick him up. This was enough to make my mother agree to have the barbecue dismantled, though nothing unusual was found when it was removed. My first personal experience occurred one evening while my sister and I were lying on her bed. She had just fallen asleep when I saw something strange, a small, sheepdog-like creature scurrying across the floor. It was smaller than usual, but looked real nonetheless. The animal quickly disappeared under the bed, and that was the last I saw of it. The next night, the crows started to appear. In the months that followed, the incidents seemed to quiet down. Few people, including my father, believed the strange things my mother, sister, and I claimed about 8 First Street. However, by this time, my parents began to grow concerned about my growing fascination with ghosts and the macabre. I was only about 4 years old, but it seemed like the house was having an effect on me. The next big event took place around Christmas time. My sister and I had been playing when we heard a steady beating of drums coming from the backyard. At first, it was soft and slow, but it gradually grew louder and faster, until it was so intense that we both started crying. We ran out of the house and sat in the street until our parents returned. This was enough for my mother to be convinced, though my father remained skeptical. The years 1991 and 1992 were quieter, and many of the details have faded from my memory. But 3 significant events still stand out. The first happened when my family was outside in the backyard and I was inside alone. I distinctly felt an unknown presence, a cold hand on my shoulder. The sensation was icy, and even now, over a decade later, I can still remember it vividly. Around this time, my parents discovered the disturbing artwork I had made in my top room cupboard, 3 walls and 2 doors covered in drawings of the dead. It was also in this cupboard that my favorite childhood book mysteriously disappeared. I had been reading it with a flashlight, and the next moment, it was gone. A thorough search by my parents turned up nothing, and to this day, I have no idea what happened to it. The second event happened in mid-1992 when my sister was away at camp. I distinctly recall hearing her voice calling out to me throughout the house, despite her being miles away. By early 1993, things had started to escalate again. The father greeting incident occurred once more, and my father's skepticism began to crack when my mother told him about the night our new Labrador retrievers both began barking at something unseen on the roof. The sigh that followed, audible to everyone in the house, was enough to convince my father there was something going on. Not long after, my mother began hearing a voice singing in the hallways late at night. Each time she went to investigate, the voice would fade away. Around this time, my sister started growing increasingly distressed. She claimed that an icy presence was chasing her around the house, even lifting her off the ground when she tried to stop. While it sounded far-fetched to me, her frightened state left me questioning what might be happening. The most alarming incident happened when my sister and a friend were alone in the house. When my mother and I returned home, we found my sister and her friend sobbing in the street. They claimed they'd heard footsteps in the hallway, doors opening by themselves, and lights and radios turning on and off. It was then that we all agreed something was seriously wrong with the house. I also had a personal sighting of a teenage boy in the hallway, which I later saw again, this time with a witness. This just added fuel to the fire. A few weeks later, my sister, myself, and 2 of her male friends decided to confront the forces in the house. That night marked the last time we ever felt the presence. Afterward, it was as if nothing had ever happened. Even the crows stopped coming. 2 years passed, and I was sitting in a classroom one day when a girl who lived a few houses away, someone I'd never spoken to before, but who shared the same name as my sister, started telling the class about a ghost in her house. Her stories were identical to mine. That same week, the crows returned. At first, only a few appeared, but eventually, there were up to 20 at a time. This happened about a year ago in my house. I've been practicing astral projection and developing my psychic abilities for years. It's something I've always been drawn to and can't get enough of. Ghosts have also intrigued me, especially since my mom and other family members have shared stories of their own ghostly encounters. I believe that when spirits of the deceased aren't ready to move on, they stay here on Earth. They become invisible to the human eye but can still interact with our world. I think when we see a ghost, it's because our mind briefly taps into this alternate dimension. Some people might experience it more often, but for most of us, it happens when we least expect it, maybe because our third eye is more active at that moment. This is just my personal belief, and I'm not trying to convince anyone else. Now, my story begins when I was about 10 years old, living in my old house. I saw what I thought was my dead uncle, someone I had never met but had seen in pictures. He had died in a car accident with my dad, but my dad survived. People said they saw him on the day he died, walking down the stairs or knocking on the door. I saw him sitting on the couch, and I ran upstairs as fast as I could. Later, I heard him whisper my name when I was drawing late one night. Fast forward to last year. One night, I was lying in bed watching TV when I felt something, or someone, lay down next to me. The bed dipped as if someone had applied pressure to it. The bedroom light was on, so I didn't panic, but I did wonder if it was real. Later that night, while I was trying to astral project, I heard my guitar, which was leaning against the wall, make a noise. It was a sound that only happens when someone walks past it. The neck of the guitar makes a clicking sound on the tuning knobs. I could recreate that sound just by walking past it, so when I heard it, I tried to ignore it. But then it happened again. I was certain there was something in the room with me. When I meditate and get into a trance state, I become more aware of things around me, things I wouldn't normally notice. It's hard to explain to someone who doesn't practice astral projection, but it's like I open up another sense. That night I knew I wasn't alone. After these events, I became sure that there was a ghost in my house. A few years earlier, I had seen a black shadow move through the crack of a door where light was shining. When I went to turn on the light in the room, it shattered. I was terrified. The day after the bed and guitar incident, I decided to tell my dad, even though I knew he didn't really believe in ghosts. He stopped me and asked, "Were you home around 3:30 p.m. yesterday?" I told him no, I had been at work. He said that while he was downstairs grading papers, he heard footsteps upstairs. He was so sure someone was home that he called out my name and my brother's name, but no one answered. This convinced my dad that something strange was going on in the house. I moved into a house in Mississauga, Ontario, with my spouse Jason. It seemed like a nice place at first, and we rented the basement. About a month after we moved in, things started to get weird. We began hearing strange noises and noticed that things were being moved around, like entire cabinets getting rearranged. Then, small handprints started showing up on my mirrors, first in the closet, then in the bathroom. Things started breaking on their own. At first, we thought it might be the spirits of children. We tried to be kind, almost motherly, feeling sorry for them. But I was struggling with depression while all this was happening. One day, I saw a boy named John crying in the corner of the room, and then in the middle of the room, crying into my dress. I talked to him, gave him some toys, and told him it was okay. Things calmed down for a bit, but then they stopped completely. I cleansed the house, and it felt like the presence had gone. But after a month, everything started again, this time worse. Jason began to feel physical attacks, being poked, slapped, and hit. I started feeling an overwhelming sadness, like I was dead. I didn't understand it. I also began having recurring dreams where John was playing and then choking to death on an apple. It made sense since the house used to be a farm, but the haunting wouldn't stop. We tried cleansing the house again, but the attacks grew more intense. One night, my friend Ash stayed over. She heard laughter and scurrying in the kitchen. At first, she thought it was my rabbit, but then realized it wasn't. She also heard soft crying, like a little girl, and after that, she never came back. Another night, Jason was hit and poked again. He asked if whatever was there could hear him, and the response was a hard hit to his head. He kept asking questions, and when he asked how old it was, it hit him again, 8 times, then 10, then 6, then 8 again. He continued asking, naming different rooms in the house, and when he said, "Kitchen," the hits came again. He ran to the kitchen, heard the garbage moving, and ran back to the room. The noises grew louder. On Thanksgiving Day, while we were having dinner, the plates and dishes in the kitchen crashed into the sink. My violin rosin was smashed, my goblets destroyed, and knives were thrown off the walls. Another time, I was sitting at the computer when I felt something hit me in the head with a blunt object I couldn't see. It felt like the violence was directed at me. I started feeling watched, as if something wanted me dead. This sense of dread stayed with me after that. One night, Jason and I were in bed. We couldn't sleep in the dark anymore. We saw a dark shadow appear in the corner of the room, growing larger. Jason turned on the light, and it disappeared. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Things only got worse. I started feeling sick, stomach aches and pain all over. I still felt unwelcome in my own home. One evening, I was showering when I heard Jason come home and call out to me. I answered, but when I looked, a frightening face was staring at me through the shower curtain. I called out to Jason again, but he wasn't home yet. I rushed out of the shower, still in a towel, and sat on the stairs until he arrived. Later, Jason came home to find me crying with blood on my face. I had 18 deep scratches across my cheek. He tried to calm me, but the attacks didn't stop. In just a minute, I was scratched again, this time across my chest. He was shocked, but it didn't end there. As he checked the bathroom, I was scratched again, this time along my back and spine. The pain was intense, and it burned for days afterward. We decided we had to leave as soon as possible. The night before we moved, I woke up with a burning pain in my leg. I didn't think much of it at first, but later I noticed a second-degree burn on my leg, the size of my palm. I'm a very light sleeper, so I still don't know how it happened. The burn still isn't fully healed, and my chest remains scarred. Early last year, some friends and I moved from Melbourne to Shepparton because I had a spot at the local university. We were in a rush to find a place before the first term started. Finding a house for 4 young people was tough. Real estate agents weren't interested in dealing with us. Eventually, we met Jessica, a young agent who seemed to understand our situation. She showed us a few houses, and the last one on the list caught our attention right away. We instantly liked it. Getting landlord approval for this house was surprisingly easy, especially after all the trouble we'd had before. We found out it had been on the market for months with no interest. We joked about it being haunted but didn't take it seriously. After moving in, I began feeling uneasy when I was alone at home, so I got a cat. The second event, though, was much stranger and harder to explain. One night, my housemate Adam woke up to see a glowing figure at the end of his bed. At first, I didn't believe him, but he showed me a photo he took with his phone. In the photo, there was a girl who seemed to give off her own light. The only weird part was that her face was hidden by a black square. We checked the time on the phone, and everyone was accounted for. We tried to recreate the photo in the same pitch-black room, but no matter what we did, we could only capture blurry images, nothing like what Adam had seen. Still, I wasn't fully convinced. One night, our other housemate Domi was home alone while we were in Melbourne. She was trying to sleep when she heard the toilet door slammed shut. She just used the bathroom and always closed the door. Terrified, she lay there, eyes closed, when suddenly she saw a bright flash of light in her bedroom, which she described as like lightning. Surprisingly, instead of feeling more scared, she felt calm and fell asleep right away. A couple of weeks later, Domi and I were watching a My Chemical Romance video diary. My cat, Henry, was sitting on my lap, and Tony, my boyfriend, had gone out to the shops. Adam was at his girlfriend's place. We had the TV turned up loud, but not enough to drown out the sound of the cat food box being shaken in the kitchen. We paused the video, exchanged looks, and watched as Henry tried to go towards the noise. Freaked out, we bolted out of the house. The noise followed us, and we could still hear it as we ran to the front door. Just as we stepped onto the footpath, Tony's car turned onto the street. That's when I really started to believe. There were many other strange things too. I've seen the ghost of a man, whom we think is the father, and a little girl who seems harmless. Tony has seen both of them too, and there have been countless unexplained noises. We even did a séance, and the spirits seemed to point to my initials. It wasn't scary at all. In fact, it made me feel better, like I'd been acknowledged in some way. I met my best friend Diane during our freshman year in high school in 1980. We both lived in Whittier. Diane's house was on Mar Vista Street near Kalima Road, a spot known for some strange and spooky things happening. Recently, you might have heard about a woman's body being found near that same area in the canyon. She worked at Coca-Cola in Downey and was about to file for divorce when she disappeared. They found her body about a month ago, and while the murderer hasn't been caught, they suspect it might be her husband. She had been planning to take custody of his daughter and was about to testify in a sexual harassment case at her job. But back to the story. One day, Diane and I decided to skip school and go to her house. Her place was beautiful, with nice furniture and big rooms. But there was something about it that made me uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I was nervous. Diane had to use the bathroom, and I asked her not to, but she just laughed it off. Still, I went with her to the bathroom. We left soon after and went to the mall, but Diane never mentioned anything about the house. Even after high school, we stayed close, and I basically became part of her family. One night in 1986, I stayed over at Diane's place. That eerie feeling was still there, but I managed to get through the night without anything happening. A couple of years later, in 1988 or 1989, I was celebrating Christmas at her house. I walked into another room to join her sister and her husband. They were laughing, and I asked what was so funny. They told me they were laughing about the ghost in the house. I was shocked. Diane said they'd all felt a presence in the house, and eventually they'd seen it. Diane told me that one time, the ghost got into bed with her. She thought it was her sister Nancy coming home drunk. Diane was lying on her side when she felt someone put an arm over her. When she looked, there was no arm, but she could still feel it. Terrified, she jumped out of bed and ran to her parents' room. Her parents had often woken up in the middle of the night to see someone looking into their bedroom from the hallway. The figure would never enter their room, but they could see its head peering in. Nancy had her own terrifying encounter one night. She woke up feeling like someone was behind her. She didn't want to turn around, but she was afraid it could be a burglar. So, she forced herself to turn over and saw a black, hooded figure standing there. She screamed and ran straight to her parents' room. She saw it again later, this time in broad daylight. She came home one afternoon with her boyfriend around 4:30 p.m. and found a window open. Her boyfriend boosted her up, and as she was climbing in through the window, she saw the black figure walk right by. She screamed and had her boyfriend pull her back out of the window, and they waited for her mom to come home. The thing eventually came into their parents' bedroom one night. Her mom saw it and screamed for her dad to wake up, but he wouldn't. She even scratched his face trying to wake him up, but he didn't stir. Finally, she managed to turn on the light, and the figure vanished. I was angry that they hadn't told me any of this earlier, especially Diane. She knew I had felt something strange when I first visited, but she never mentioned it. She said that a lot of people felt the same way when they visited, and she knew what it was, but she didn't want to scare anyone. Eventually, Diane's family moved out, and her cousins moved in. They didn't take the ghost story seriously, but according to Diane, their family has been in turmoil ever since. One day, a friend of Diane's dad asked them, "What are you guys doing with that?" It turned out that they had a statue, which had been found in a Mexican cave. According to the friend, it was an evil god statue that people used for sacrifices. Diane's mom had bought it from an antique store because it looked interesting, but they never thought it could be haunted. They left the statue behind when they moved out. One last thing about the Colima Road area. One night in 1998, I was coming home from a friend's house. It was exactly midnight when I reached the top of the hill on Colima Road. A UFO flew right over the road. At first, I thought it was a reflection on my windshield, but I had already reached the top of the hill, and there were no streetlights. The UFO looked like a tennis ball at arm's length and streaked across the sky, heading towards La Habra. UFOs, ghosts, murders, and urban legends are all part of the lore around the Colima Road Canyon area. I work at Camp Roberts in California, a military base built in the 1940s for basic training. The base has been around for decades, and some of the structures still stand today. One of the most intriguing parts of the camp is the old hospital complex located in the 200 to 300 block. 9 buildings remain from that hospital, but 8 of them are in a locked, gated area, making them off-limits. The buildings themselves aren't huge, but they're not small either, about 2 minutes walk from one side to the other. Years ago, these buildings were connected by covered wooden walkways, but only one remains with any visible evidence of these walkways, Building 308. They removed the walkway and replaced it with stairs, adding soda machines where the platform used to be. Building 308 is next to Building 307, and behind it is Building 315. Behind 307 is Building 305, and diagonally from the back of 307, about 50 feet away, is Building 303. Next to 303 is Building 304. All these buildings have entrances on their ends, except for 303 and 304, which are built more like a giant hallway, with rooms branching off the main space. One night, my coworker and I were tasked with locking up, as we always did. It was late, and the camp was already dark. We needed to go through each building to make sure both doors were locked. I had buildings 307 and 305, while my coworker took 308 and 315. After locking up 305, I went to 307. As I was finishing up, I stepped into the center of the compound and saw my coworker on the platform of Building 308, heading toward Building 315. I walked toward him to tell him to hurry up. Now, Buildings 307 and 305 are only about 20 feet from each other. I watched my coworker disappear behind the soda machines at Building 308. When I got to the platform, though, no one was there. The area was open, and you would have been able to see anyone leaving the platform. I rushed over to Building 315, and to my surprise, I saw my coworker walking back from the other end of the building. That's when I realized what I saw wasn't him. There's no way anyone else could have been in the compound. It's completely gated and locked. He walked out of the building, looked at me, and asked what was wrong. I told him, "We need to leave now." As we walked back, I explained what had happened, but he just laughed it off. We continued working there for another 6 months. But nothing strange happened after that, until one night when we were shutting off the lights in Building 303, the last building we had to lock up. My coworker turned off one set of lights with a single switch, then walked to the other side of the building to turn off the other set. But when he did, the first set of lights flicked back on. I looked at him and said, "Told you so. Let's go." He rushed to the other side of the building to turn off the lights again, and we both ran out of there as fast as we could. Our boss doesn't believe the buildings at Camp Roberts are haunted, but my coworker and I are convinced that's why our boss always leaves before dark. After I shared this story with one of the longtime employees at the base, he told me something chilling. The hospital that used to stand there was filled with people recovering from war injuries, diseases, boot camp trainees, and Italian POWs held at Camp Roberts. The 300 block, he said, was the death prep area, where they would prepare the dead for burial. That's when everything clicked for me. What we experienced might not have been some random occurrence. It could be tied to the spirits of those who died in that hospital, still lingering in the buildings where they spent their final days. When I was about 2 years old, my great-grandma Christine passed away. I don't remember her much, only vaguely. She was a gypsy and had a habit of sitting on the floor a lot, which I recall. After she passed, I started playing with a piece of string and called it Christine, talking to it as if she was still there. My mum found it odd. I also developed an obsession with sitting on the floor, which made me wonder if somehow I had been influenced by her, even after her death. Around the age of 4, I had another experience. I was playing in my room when I heard a woman's voice softly whisper my name. It wasn't my mum's voice, and I knew that right away. I heard it 2 more times, but I just went on playing, still confused about what I had heard. At my Nana's house when I was about 6, I saw a small black shadow dart past me and disappear behind the fridge. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I screamed for my Nana to move the fridge. She thought I was being silly, but I was sure I'd seen something. She moved the fridge, but nothing was there. It felt like a shadow ghost, something that's hard to explain. There were also nights when I would hear scratching sounds in the room at my Nana's house. It scared me so much that I would ask my Nana to search the room for monsters. I thought it could have been mice, but I doubted my granddad would have allowed them in the house. When I was about 10, I was sitting on my Nana's bed, watching a video with her dog, Tuppy, on my lap. Suddenly, Tuppy pricked up his ears and started barking at the TV. I thought it was strange but told him to be quiet. Then, the TV switched channels by itself. I checked for the remote, but it was untouched on the side. The TV kept flicking through channels, and Tuppy kept barking at it. I went to get my Nana, and when we returned, the TV was back on the movie. Later, it happened again before the TV turned off by itself, and Tuppy ran out of the room. I followed him, feeling really confused by it all. There was another strange incident at my Nana's house involving a plant. My cousin was walking past a tall stand with a large plant on top when the pot flew off and hit her on the head. She hadn't touched the stand, and I saw it happen. My Nana never put a plant there again after that. At my mum's house, I've had some of the most unnerving experiences. One time, I heard a loud breath right in my ear, and I felt the breath on my neck. I screamed, but when I looked around, no one was there. The house has often had strange noises, especially footsteps on the wooden floor when no one is around. The attic, which has been converted into a room, is where I sometimes hear footsteps above me when I'm alone. The strangest incident happened with the doorbell. The sound box for the doorbell was next to my room in the attic. Every time someone rang the doorbell, it sounded incredibly loud in my room, waking me up. One day, I noticed the doorbell box had been removed, and the wires were cut. I thought my mum did it, but when I told her, she was shocked and scared. We both knew it couldn't have been anyone else. We never found the box after that. Another strange thing that's happened is when we've searched for something, only to find it in a place that was really obvious, even though we had already checked there. We now joke and say thank you when it happens, as if the ghost is helping us find things. I also hear noises from the kitchen sometimes, like someone is washing dishes or preparing food. When I go to check, there's never anyone there. The oddest thing that happened was with a tennis ball in our garden. One day, it appeared in the garden, and I thought it was from next door. We threw it back over the fence, but the next day, it was in the same spot. After a few days of throwing it over, my mum decided to throw it in the bin. The next day, it was back in the garden. My mum became quite freaked out and threw it over the fence one last time, but the next day, it was there again. I eventually moved it to the other end of the garden, but it still reappeared in the same spot. After a few days, it just disappeared, and we never saw it again. There's also the matter of strange dreams I've had, though I'm not sure if dreams are related to ghosts. One thing I've learned through all this is that I'm never fully alone in our house. and I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to explain everything. But I've come to accept that sometimes the strange things that happen just can't be explained. When I was in college, I stayed at Ateneo de Manila University, which is run by Jesuit priests. It was a fairly new school compared to the Ivy League schools in the US, but the land it stood on had a long history. During the Japanese occupation of the Philippines in World War II, it was reportedly used as a prison camp or a war hospital. Whether or not this had anything to do with what happened to me and my roommates, I'm not sure. All I know is that we experienced some strange things in the dorm. It was summer, and I was staying in Savini Hall with 3 other girls, Michelle, Kat, and another girl who was only there for summer classes, so for the sake of the story, I'll call her Summer Girl. Michelle, Kat, and I were already familiar with each other after living in Iliatso Hall during regular terms. But during the summer, we had to move into the 3rd floor of the boys' dorm, which led us to room 314. From the start, we noticed strange things happening in room 314. Nothing too big at first, just little things like doors locking by themselves, and hair standing on end in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. It was unsettling, but we tried to brush it off. But then, 2 events happened that marked our summer in a way we couldn't ignore. The first incident involved Michelle. Her bed was near the door, and there were wooden window jalousies on the door, which had a half-open space at the bottom that wouldn't close properly. One night, while Michelle was studying French, she suddenly jumped out of her seat and ran outside. Kat and I were shocked by her sudden reaction. When she came back, we asked what happened. She told us that while she was studying, she had been staring off into space when she saw a figure through the open jalousies. A woman, dressed in a long white nightgown, was walking very slowly. The pace and what she was wearing made Michelle curious, so she ran outside to check it out. When she got outside, though, there was no one there. She even went next door, assuming the person in the nightgown would have just walked there, but no one was wearing a white nightgown. Michelle was sure of what she had seen, but we couldn't explain it. That night, the 3 of us prayed for any restless souls in the area. The second incident was even more unnerving. This time, I was alone with Michelle in the room. I was trying out my new curling iron and had set up a mirror on my desk. While I curled my hair, I could see Summer Girl through the mirror sitting at her desk, reading or studying. Kat was lying on her bed, and Michelle was sitting at her own desk, studying as well. As I curled my hair, I noticed that Summer Girl seemed to be crying while reading something. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should go over and comfort her, but then decided not to be too nosy since I didn't know her very well. I continued doing my hair, but as I started to straighten it, I noticed that she was still crying. That's when I turned around to talk to Michelle, and I saw Summer Girl sleeping on her bed, right next to Kat's bed. In that instant, I realized what I had been seeing in the mirror wasn't Summer Girl at all. I glanced at Michelle, and she told me, "I saw her too." We both immediately jumped out of our beds, terrified. That night, Michelle and I ended up sleeping in the same bed. The next day, when Kat saw us lying in the same bed, she asked what happened. We told her about the strange figure we had seen in the mirror. She seemed surprised and said that Summer Girl had gone to bed at the same time as her, so there was no way she could have been sitting at her desk crying. We were both shaken by what we had seen. I had been looking in the mirror for about 20 minutes, and there was no way the person I saw could have been Summer Girl. After that, we decided to pray for the restless souls before going to bed every night. From that point on, the rest of our summer in room 314 was uneventful. We never saw anything like that again, but we always made sure to acknowledge the presence we felt and offer our prayers. It seemed like the spirits left us alone after that. It happened a while ago, but I still remember the events of that night clearly. My fiancé, our friend Ed, and I were out joyriding one night, close to midnight. We were getting bored and my fiancé, James, asked, "What do you guys want to do?" I didn't have any ideas and, to be honest, I was starting to feel tired and just wanted to go home. That's when Ed suggested, "Why don't we take her to that house off of Highway 36? I was confused and asked, "What house?" And James said, "You'll see." We drove towards the house Ed was talking about, and I immediately felt uneasy as we approached. It was a large, run-down 2-story house. The moment I saw it, I felt a wave of nausea. The house had no paint, the windows were shattered, and the doors were missing. There was a barn in the back that was falling apart, and in the front yard, there was a huge tree and an old well that seemed to be caving in. In the back, I could just make out an old cellar. It looked abandoned, like no one had lived there for years. I asked James about the house, and he told me the story. Apparently, back in the 1900s, a family had lived there, a husband, wife, and their children. James explained that somehow, mercury had gotten into their well water, driving the family to madness. The father eventually killed his children with an axe, hung his wife from the big tree in the front yard, and then shot himself. This story seemed to be backed up by a newspaper article from my town's library, which made it all the more real. At this point, we were just sitting in the truck when it suddenly died. I wasn't too freaked out at first. Vehicles do that sometimes when they idle for too long. But then, something happened that made my stomach turn. I looked to the side of the house, and I saw what I can only describe as a massive dog. It was so big that no breed I could think of could match its size. I could see the reflection of light in its eyes, and its pink tongue was moving as it panted. I could even see its ribcage as it breathed. I was completely speechless, pointing at it, and the guys looked at me, confused. Then, the truck died again and wouldn't start. That's when I saw something else. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the house. The guys saw it too and turned to look in the same direction. There was someone moving inside the house. The weird part was, one minute they were upstairs, and the next minute, they were downstairs. It was as if they were moving back and forth too quickly to be real. I started to feel panicked. It was hard to breathe, like a weight was pressing on my chest. I looked around the yard and thought I saw someone walking. The guys saw it too, but this wasn't just a person. It was like one moment it looked solid, and the next, it was almost see-through. James tried to start the truck again, and finally it started. We quickly left the driveway and headed for home. I know the guys won't admit it, but they were just as scared as I was. When we got home, I went to the bathroom to run some bath water. As I looked in the mirror, I noticed a huge handprint on my chest. I called James in to look, and he confirmed it. I think whatever was in that house had somehow been pressing on my chest, which is why I couldn't breathe. There were other things I saw that night, but I can't explain them. I'll get a copy of the newspaper article about the family and post it here, but I'm still not sure how to do that. Whether what happened was a shared hallucination or not, that handprint was real, and I'll never forget that night. I've had experiences with ghosts since I was around 9 or 10 years old. They've touched me, I've heard them, but I didn't actually see one until I was 18. My family and I had just moved from a house we'd lived in for years to a 2-story townhouse. I loved the new place. My sister and I shared a room upstairs, which had a balcony with huge sliding glass doors. After we moved in, though, things got a little strange. The first odd thing I noticed was how cold my room was at night. I would complain to my mom that it was freezing, even though the rest of the house was pretty warm. She said it was because of the sliding glass doors, so she bought thick curtains, but that only helped a little. Every night, I'd come home around 10:30 or 11 p.m. and talk to my boyfriend on the phone before bed. Then I'd head upstairs to my room to sleep. I started feeling like I was being watched, but I ignored it. One night, around midnight, I heard footsteps running back and forth in the hallway. I thought it was my parents, or my brother walking around. The next morning, I asked them if anyone had been up walking around, but they all said no. I just brushed it off. Another night, around 1 or 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps down the stairs, followed by the door to the backyard opening and slamming shut. I was terrified but forced myself to go back to sleep, not knowing what to do. I told my boyfriend about how I felt in my room, like someone was always watching me, and it felt like I wasn't alone. He didn't believe me at first. But one night when he came over, we went to my room to watch a movie. While he was setting it up, he looked over at me, dropped the movie, and said, "I don't want to scare you, but I just saw a lady standing on your balcony. She had long blonde/white hair and was wearing a blue dress." And then she vanished. I didn't see her, but after that, my boyfriend started believing me. One night, my boyfriend was babysitting my 1-year-old brother. My brother was asleep in his crib upstairs when my boyfriend heard footsteps and some noises. He went up to check, and when he passed the bathroom, he noticed the light was on, so he turned it off. He then walked into my parents' room, where my brother was sleeping peacefully. But when he went back down the stairs, he heard more footsteps. He went back upstairs, turned off the bathroom light again, but when he turned to leave, the light was on once more. He went into my parents' room to check on my brother, and this time my brother was sitting up in his crib, staring at the wall. He wasn't crying, which was unusual for him when he woke up. My boyfriend walked into the room, but my brother didn't acknowledge him at all. A week later, my boyfriend, my stepdad, my brother, and I were sitting in the living room. I heard a noise and looked over, and to my surprise I saw a woman standing there. I said, "Mom?" But the woman vanished. I got up, thinking maybe my mom had come home, but she wasn't there. It was the same woman my boyfriend had seen on the balcony, blonde hair and a blue dress. I had thought it was my mom because of the hair color, but it wasn't. Another time, my boyfriend stayed over downstairs, and in the middle of the night, he woke up to see the same woman standing at the end of the couch, staring at him. She stood there for a few minutes before walking away. He then saw her feet go up the stairs, and he heard footsteps in the hallway above him, heading straight toward my room. This woman was the only ghost I've ever seen. She didn't seem mean, but there was something about her that creeped me out. It was like she needed attention or something, but I couldn't understand why she made me feel so uncomfortable. I never felt like she meant any harm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was just off. I never believed in ghosts until my family moved into a house that changed my perspective forever. We had just left a house we'd lived in for years, and moved to a new place that needed a lot of work. It was a big house in a great neighborhood, and the rent was cheap, but the house was old and run down. We didn't know about the tragic history of the place until later. We spent almost 2 years fixing up the house. It was huge, lots of windows, a big living room, a big dining room, and a huge kitchen. It was perfect for our large family. But from the beginning, there were odd things happening. At first, they were small, strange noises, doors opening and closing on their own, and voices carrying up the stairs when no one was downstairs. I started hearing my name being called, but no one was ever around. One night, while I was trying to sleep, I felt a pressure on my chest, like something heavy was pushing down on me. I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't move. It only lasted a minute, but it felt like much longer. That's when I realized something was in the house. Something had singled me out. My sister never heard her name called, but I did constantly. It started to feel like I wasn't alone in my room, like someone was always standing right behind me. One day, I was home alone and decided to try out the new computer we had gotten for Christmas. It was the second computer we'd ever had, and I found a voice recorder on it. I decided to record some silence just to see what would happen. When I played it back, I heard a voice, soft but clear, crying out, "No! Don't!" The voice was definitely a woman's, and it sounded like she was in distress. I was in complete silence when I recorded it, and there was no explanation for the voice. When I played it for my family, they dismissed it, saying it could have been some background noise. But it couldn't have been. I recorded in total silence, and the voice was unmistakable. After that, I saw her. One day I was doing laundry in the basement, and I looked over to see a woman sitting in a chair that hadn't been there before. As soon as I looked directly at her, she vanished. I'll never forget what she looked like: long dark hair, wearing a red V-neck shirt and a black leather skirt. Her face was blurry, but I could clearly see her clothes. I knew it wasn't just my imagination. She was real. Later, my sister had a group of friends over, and we all took pictures with our new digital camera. When my mom loaded the pictures onto the computer, there was one photo that stood out. In between two frames, there was a blurry shot of a woman sitting on the couch, looking straight ahead. It looked exactly like the woman I had seen in the basement. Everyone at the party was confused, because no one was wearing a red shirt. The picture was fuzzy, and the woman's feet seemed to disappear, but it was her, just like in the basement. I started calling her Christy, though I didn't know why. It just felt right. But a few days later, my mom came to me with a newspaper clipping from 1993. She apologized for not believing me and asked me to read the article. It was about a 17-year-old girl named Tiffany Catherine Postel, who had been murdered by her father in our house. The photo was a school picture of her, and she had long dark hair, just like the woman I had seen. She was wearing a red V-neck shirt, and it looked like she was wearing a black leather skirt too. I was shocked. It was the same woman. The name, Christy, I had given her didn't come from nowhere. It was Tiffany. She had died in our house, and I had seen her. I don't know why she appeared to me, but I do know that what I experienced that day, and all the strange events leading up to it, cemented my belief in spirits and the afterlife. Hi, I'm Amelia, and I'm about to turn 16 in a few days. I've had a lot of strange experiences in my life, and I want to share them. It all started when I was about 6 years old. I was living with my mom at the time, and I remember seeing two women walking near the house. They didn't seem like anyone I knew. They both had long white dresses with big rose prints, elegant white hats, and looked like they were from an older time. One was shorter than the other. They smiled at me as they walked by, and I just watched them disappear into the distance. When I looked away and then back, they were gone. A couple of years later, when I was 8, I moved in with my grandparents in the city. My mom wanted me to go there so I could get a better education, as the school near her house was bad. I lived there during the week and would visit my mom on weekends. It was after I started going to church around 14 that things began to get strange. I can't pinpoint the exact moment it started, but I began hearing strange noises under my bed as I was trying to fall asleep. Sometimes, I could feel someone lying next to me. There were nights when I would wake up at exactly 3 a.m. One night, while I was trying to sleep, I saw a white orb above my bedroom door. It stayed there until I fell asleep. I didn't feel threatened, though. In fact, whenever I felt sad or cried, I could feel cold hands on mine, or sometimes, it felt like someone was hugging me. I was often aware that someone was near, like I was being watched, but I could never see them. I didn't know how, but I could tell that the presence was male. I even had a vision of a young man, maybe 18, who had just committed suicide. Things kept getting weirder. One night, my bed suddenly started shaking. It couldn't have been an earthquake. There are rarely any earthquakes where I live, and when we do have one, it's once in 100 years. There was also a dark shadow that followed me everywhere. It was there when I was with friends, behind trees or walls, and even when I was at my mom's house. At my grandparents' apartment, I would see black cats running around and disappearing under my bed. One time, I went to visit my great-grandfather's grave in the nearby cemetery. As I walked through, I saw the shadow again, but this time, when I looked behind me, I saw a man, apparently following me. It was about 5 p.m., and there was no one else in the cemetery. I started walking faster, and he did too. I ran out of there, terrified, with him only a few steps behind. I was in tears when I reached the edge of the graveyard, but thankfully, a stranger was nearby and helped me. A little while after, I woke up one morning to see an old man standing by my bed, dressed in white. I blinked, and he vanished, as if he knew I was looking at him. I strongly believe it was my great-grandfather. My mom has told me nothing but good things about him, and I respect him deeply. One day, while my grandma was taking a bath and my grandpa was at home, I heard voices, more than one person talking. I assumed it was my grandma coming out of the bathroom, talking to me. But when I went to check, no one was there. I felt an overwhelming sense that I shouldn't be in the living room, so I quickly shut the door to my room. With all these experiences came some strange gifts. I began to sense what people were going to say before they said it, know who was calling me before I picked up the phone, and I would get déjà vu from dreams I had. It's a lot to process, but it's become part of my life, and I know it's real. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've been a stay-at-home mom for over a year now. We moved into our first home, a nearly new mobile home in a nice community. I never thought a mobile home could be haunted, but I know land can be. I did some research and found that the lot we're on had been empty for years before our home was placed there in 2002. It's strange since it's a corner lot and could have fit a house easily. We bought the place in March 2006. From the first night, I felt uneasy, like someone was watching me from the hallway. Exactly 1 week after moving in, I gave birth to our daughter, who's now 15 months old. About a month later, when my husband started working overnight shifts, I heard something strange. One night, at 2:30 a.m., after getting up to feed my daughter, I heard loud footsteps, like someone wearing heavy shoes, walking up and down the hallway. I lay in bed for a few minutes, terrified, expecting someone to walk into my room. Then, the footsteps stopped. I thought maybe it was tree branches hitting the roof, but then I heard two male voices talking clearly in the living room, like they were right next to me. One voice was older, in his 50s or 60s, and the other sounded younger, maybe in his 20s or 30s. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, the voices stopped. I checked outside, but there was no one there. All the windows and doors were closed, and it's impossible to hear someone talking outside unless they're right next to the window. After that, I moved my daughter back into my room, and she stayed there until she outgrew the bassinet at 2.5 months. When she started sleeping in her room again, I heard the footsteps again. And the voices came back too. In November, I started feeling something pulling on my hair when I was in the kitchen. It was a strong tug, enough to make me turn around, but no one was ever there. Once, my husband and I were doing dishes together, and I felt a tug on my ponytail. But he had both hands in the sink, and his hands were wet, so it wasn't him. I thought I was losing my mind, so I went to the doctor and was put on anti-anxiety medication. The meds helped with my anxiety and PTSD, but the footsteps and voices stopped for a while. That's when I started noticing strange orbs and wisps in some of the pictures of my daughter. I had one really good photo, but my computer crashed and I lost it. Around February, I was reading in bed when I heard a loud "Hey" right in my ear. I felt the heat of someone's breath on my neck. I was home alone, except for my daughter, who was sleeping. I was really freaked out, but somehow finished my book and went to bed. At 2:30 a.m., I woke up to loud stomping footsteps again, going up and down the hall. It lasted about 2 to 3 minutes, and I eventually fell back asleep. Since then, I've heard the "Hey" several times, always followed by the loud footsteps. I haven't felt my hair being pulled since December, but I stay up until 3 a.m. most nights, trying to avoid waking up to the voices and footsteps. I think whatever is going on is probably residual energy from something that happened on the land. It's unsettling, but I try not to be afraid. It's just creepy hearing voices in the living room in the middle of the night, and thinking someone is in the house. My first paranormal experience happened when I was about 5 or 6. My family and I were visiting relatives in Mexico, staying in a house we used to own. The town itself had a dark history, once a battlefield, with soldiers marching through and battles fought right there. Some people claim they hear the sounds of horses and men shouting orders. My grandmother lived next door to a house that was said to be haunted by these soldiers, both in sound and sight. The town is considered a sort of cemetery, as many people who died in battle were buried right where they fell. It's also said that people buried their money and treasures to hide them from being taken. So, many homes in the town are built on top of buried wealth. The house we stayed in had an eerie past as well. It once belonged to a woman and her son, and when we moved in, we were told that money was buried underneath it. Whether it was theirs, no one knew for sure. I later found out that this woman's spirit was the one I encountered as a child. I didn't know any of this history when I was younger though. On our second day in Mexico, my parents were busy cleaning, and we decided to all stay in their room for the night. The next morning, around 7 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the room. I kept my eyes closed, thinking it was my mom. But the footsteps circled the bed. I opened my eyes and could still hear the steps, but no one was there. I could almost sense where the person was, like I was following them. The footsteps would stop by my side of the bed, as if something was watching me, then they would continue. At that age, I wasn't scared. It didn't feel threatening, just odd. I told my dad about it the next morning, but he dismissed it, thinking someone was on the roof trying to get in. I was sure it was inside the room, but he didn't think much of it. Fast forward to when I was 16, 3 years after our last visit. My aunt was living in the same house. She mentioned that, when she first moved in, there were big letters scratched into the dining room wall. Letty. She didn't think much of it until she started painting over the letters, and suddenly, her paintbrush flew out of her hand, hitting the wall behind her. That's when I became more interested in the house's history. I asked my other aunt about it, and she told me about the woman and her son who had lived there, and how they had been seen around the house. Looking back, I realized this was the start of many strange things I would experience throughout my life. It's strange how one moment can mark the beginning of something bigger. This happened 3 years ago, during a vacation in Scotland with my family. We were staying in an old castle hotel, a few hours outside of the city. I can't recall the exact name of the place, but everything else about the story is true. It was towards the end of our 2-week tour, and we were staying at one of the last hotels on the trip. The group had the option of meeting in the pub downstairs, but since there was a wedding going on, I decided to stay in my room and enjoy some peace and quiet. My parents went down to the pub with the rest of the group. After I took a shower, I noticed something strange. The door was shut, the room was quiet, but I had this unsettling feeling, like someone was standing just outside the bathroom door. My neck hairs stood up, even though I had locked the main door when I entered. I opened the bathroom door, and the room was empty. I spent the rest of the evening reading and journaling about my time there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still in the room with me. It was odd, like I was being watched, but I couldn't see anyone. When my parents came back, we all went to bed. There were 3 of us in the room, my mom and dad in one bed, and me in the other. The room was huge, and it was in an old castle that had been converted into a hotel, so it was a bit eerie. My mom and I both believe in ghosts and spirits, but my dad doesn't. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange sound. I had to put my hearing aids back in because I thought I was hearing something. I was familiar with my parents breathing and snoring, but this was different. There was a third, offbeat breath, coming from the middle of the room, as if something, or someone, was watching over us. I thought I was imagining things, so I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. But my neck hairs were still standing up all night. The next morning, as we were walking to the bus for a tourist trip, my mom said, "Did you hear that extra breathing last night?" I nodded. I had thought it was just my parents snoring, but then I admitted to her that I had felt like someone was in the room with me before they came back. On the second night at the hotel, I heard the same breathing again. It was creepy, but I managed to fall asleep eventually. The tour itself was amazing. We visited old historic sites, graveyards, and pubs. I especially loved the graveyards. Some of the other tourists stuck to their groups, but I wandered slowly, taking my time, wondering if I could sense any more spirits like the one at the hotel. Looking back now, I miss knowing the exact names of the places we visited and the friends I traveled with. I still think about that strange encounter in the hotel room. The memory lingers, especially when I look at the pictures from that trip. This happened when I was about 16, and I was babysitting my younger brother and my parents' friends' children, a 10-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl. We were living in Alconbury Village, East Anglia, and my bedroom was directly above the front door of the house. Just for context, we had a downstairs living room that we rarely used, with just some couches and a small TV that didn't even have satellite. Upstairs, we had a cozy living room with big couches, a wall unit entertainment system, and Sky TV. On this particular evening, I decided to let the kids watch Toy Story while I stayed in my room to read. My brother had a bit of a crush on the 14-year-old girl, and her younger brother just wanted to watch his movie. So, I left them in the living room and went across the hall to my room. We'd been living in the house for about 6 months, and over that time, we started noticing a faint smell of cigarettes and kitty litter in the air. It was strange since we were a non-smoking family, and we didn't have a cat. My dad didn't like cats, and my mom was allergic. So, I settled into my room, turned on the radio to listen to Late Night Love with Graham Torrington, a radio show that played love songs and had people call in with their relationship problems, and began reading. After a while, the radio started losing the station. I tried adjusting it, but it just went to static. I got up, reset the dial, and sat back down. A few pages into my book, the radio lost the station again. When I stood up to fix it, I noticed the dial was moving on its own. I froze. It stopped on Classic FM, which was nowhere near the station I had been listening to. Confused, I turned the dial back to my station and went to check on the kids. As I walked down the hall, I heard voices downstairs. I briefly thought my parents had returned early, but then realized I hadn't heard the front door. I quickly checked the kids' room and found them all asleep. I was starting to get nervous, but didn't want to wake them and look foolish. When I returned to my room, the radio was back on Classic FM. I turned it off and unplugged it. But then, I still heard the music, coming from downstairs. I was starting to panic, so I turned on the stairway light and crept downstairs. The smell of cigarettes and kitty litter hit me immediately, and it was so strong that it made me cringe. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard the music clearly, and I also heard 2 men talking. They sounded older, maybe in their 70s, and I caught a few words like, "the war." I cautiously peeked around the corner into the living room. The light was on, and the door was ajar. We always kept that room shut to keep the dog out, but I could hear him whining softly from the kitchen. He was behind a baby gate, wagging his tail excitedly when he saw me. I saw the shadow of a cat moving toward the doorway. That's when I panicked and ran back upstairs. I grabbed my brother, told him someone was in the house, without mentioning the ghostly details, and we went back downstairs together. When we reached the bottom, I stopped in disbelief. The light was off, and the door was now closed. But the smells were still there, cigarettes and kitty litter. My brother noticed it too, and we cautiously opened the door. The room was stifling hot, even though we never turned on the radiator in there. We kept it cold because the room wasn't used much. My brother was freaked out, but I didn't say anything about what I had heard or seen. We went back upstairs, and I joined the kids, trying to calm down as we watched Toy Story again. My parents came home about 30 minutes later, and I didn't tell them what happened. My brother never mentioned it to me, but later told his friends that our house was haunted. After that night, I never babysat there again. From then on, I went to their house instead. I rarely went into that room until we moved out. On our last day, just before we left, I went into the room one last time. The smell of cigarettes and kitty litter hit me immediately. I felt something brush against my leg and heard a muffled cough. I just said, "Bye guys, have fun scaring the next people who move in." I then heard a soft chuckle as I closed the door. As we pulled out of the driveway, I saw the curtains move slightly, and there, standing by the window, was a tabby cat, just watching me. Then I saw hands reach from behind the curtain and pull it away. It was an unsettling experience, and even now, thinking back, I'm not sure what happened. All I know is that I never felt comfortable in that house again.